When I was 11, I had one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, and to this day, I still think about how easily things could have gone horribly wrong. It was around 9 p.m. on a rainy night. I was home alone with my little brother, who was 7 at the time. Our parents had gone out, and it wasn't unusual for us to be by ourselves for a few hours. We shared a room at the front of the house, right next to the front door, with a big window that had the blinds wide open. We were just reading quietly, not paying much attention to anything outside. And that's when the doorbell rang. It startled me at first because I wasn't expecting anyone. My parents should have been the only ones coming home that late, but they always used the garage or their keys to get inside. It didn't make sense for them to be ringing the doorbell. I looked outside, expecting to see their car, but there was nothing. Just darkness and heavy rain coming down in sheets. As I got closer to the door, I heard knocking. Then I heard a man's voice. I didn't recognize it at first because at that age, the only male voice that I had memorized was my father's. And this certainly wasn't that. He was saying something about selling Girl Scout cookies. And immediately, I knew something didn't add up. Who sells Girl Scout cookies this late at night, in the middle of a storm? And why would a grown man be the one doing it? I hadn't said a word, and he couldn't see me, but he kept knocking, repeating himself like he was waiting for me to take the bait. I checked the peephole and the side window right off the front door. It was just him, a man in his late 50s, alone on my doorstep, completely soaked from the rain. No child with him, no cookies under his arm, nothing. And that was the moment that my stomach dropped. Our front door had 3 locks on it, but as I looked down, none of them were latched. I knew that I had to get them all locked, but I was hyper aware that he was standing just on the other side of the door. He had to have heard me mess with the deadbolt, and that alone made my skin crawl, knowing that he knew I was there. He knew that I was listening. He kept knocking though, repeating the same line about cookies. I didn't say a word. I was frozen, trying to decide if I should call the police. But that's when I remembered something. Our bedroom light was still on. The blinds were wide open, and my little brother was sitting right there, completely visible from the front window, lost in his book. When I turned toward our room, my fear shot through the roof. The man was no longer at the front door. He had moved, and he was standing right outside the window looking in. I can still feel the way that my heart pounded in my chest. He wasn't just glancing in. He was watching, eyes locked on the only person that he could see, my little brother, who still had no idea what was happening. That was the moment that snapped me into action. I flipped the light switch off and ran straight for the window, closing the blinds as fast as I could. For a split second, I saw his face in the dim light from outside. It was completely blank, like he wasn't even surprised that I had caught him. The second the blinds were down, I started running through the house, making sure that everything else was locked, closing every blind, every curtain. I told my brother to go get into one of the big closets in the middle of the house, one with no windows. I didn't tell him why. I didn't want him to panic. But once he was tucked away between coats and umbrellas, I just stood there in the hallway, listening. The knocking had stopped. The voice had stopped. I couldn't hear anything except the rain hammering the roof. I didn't know if he was still out there, if he was walking around the house to try another door, or if he was just standing silently, waiting. For some reason, I never called the police. I never even thought to call my parents. At the time, I think I was just in shock. It felt like if I stayed quiet and still, that he would just leave, and everything would go back to normal. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, even though deep down, I knew that this was far from ordinary. I have no idea how long I waited, but eventually, I forced myself to check. The man was gone. There were no signs of him. No car pulling away, no footsteps. Just the sound of rain. To this day, I don't know what he wanted, but I'd be willing to bet that it wasn't to sell me Samoas or tagalongs. I know that he was trying to lure me to open the door. Maybe he was hoping that I'd be alone and afraid enough to listen. Maybe he'd been watching our house, waiting for this exact moment. What I do know is that if I had been even a little less cautious, if I had opened the door, if I hadn't noticed him watching through the window, this could have ended very, very differently. That night changed me. Ever since, I have an almost obsessive habit of checking locks. The thought that still haunts me the most isn't that he was there. It's the fact that the only thing stopping him from walking inside was a few seconds. If I hadn't gotten that door locked, if I had hesitated just a little longer, he could have stepped right in. And then what? I don't know, and I never want to. When I was about 12, my great-uncle John came from Ukraine to visit us in Canada. He had a lot of stories, but this was the one that stood out most. In the late 1960s, John was traveling by train from his village to another to visit family. He had to change trains at one point and was dropped off at what amounted to a platform and a hut out in the middle of nowhere. There was no one else at the station, and other than a dirt road that led off into the surrounding woods, there was nothing else there. He waited for some time, but no train came. It was winter and getting colder and darker by the minute. And just about the time that he started worrying about a place to stay and some food to eat, an old woman appeared out of the twilight. She asked if he was waiting for such and such a train, and when he said that he was, she said it wouldn't be along until the following day. She asked if he needed a bed for the night, before offering him a meal and a room at her house, which she said was about an hour's walk from the station. Lodging with locals was more or less the standard when traveling this part of the Soviet Union, and Great-Uncle John wasn't looking forward to a hungry night on a cold platform, so he was happy to accept the offer. He took his suitcase and they set off together down the dark road into the forest. It was more than an hour away, more like 2 by foot, and by the time they arrived at the woman's small 2-story home, John was tired and hungry. They went inside and the woman lit some oil lamps and warmed some borscht for them. It was the first time John was able to see the woman clearly, and he was a bit startled to realize that the old woman was actually a man. Not wanting to pry and too tired to care, John finished his soup and asked where he would be sleeping the night. This person led him up the stairs to a tiny room with a window that contained a single bed and nothing else. He thanked her, they said goodnight to one another, and she closed the door behind her. Then she locked it, leaving him in the dark. Somewhat creeped out by this, John called out to her, but she didn't answer, and he heard nothing else coming from the hallway. Figuring that he would deal with it in the morning, and that she had probably done it by mistake, John set his suitcase down and laid on the bed, deciding to make the best of it and get some rest. Before he could fall asleep, though, he felt the urge to pee and got out of bed hoping to find a chamber pot or something that he could relieve himself in. He got onto his hands and knees and began to feel under the bed in the darkness, thinking that's where the pot would be if there were one. No pot to be found, but instead, he found a body. "Nope," Great-Uncle John said, and went right to the window to see if he could exit the room that way, only to find that it was nailed shut. He knew that if he remained in the room, he was likely a dead man. But if he broke the window and tried to get out that way, there was a good chance that that old woman, and who knows who else was there, would hear him and come into the room before he could make an escape. So he did the only thing he could do. He pulled the body from under the bed, heaved it onto the mattress, and covered it up with the blanket. Then he got himself under the bed and waited. Sure enough, about an hour later, he heard footsteps coming slowly up the stairs and then toward the room. The lock clicked and the doorknob slowly turned. In the dim light that spilled up the stairs, John saw someone move toward the bed. Then he heard several terrific and sickening thuds. The person, whoever it was, had bashed the body on the bed with a large crowbar, which they then dropped onto the floor right in front of John. Then there was silence before that person went out of the room and the door was shut again. Then footsteps down the stairs before there was silence again. John moved out from under the bed, took the crowbar, and was able to slowly and quietly pry the window open. He didn't say it, but I imagine that he was shitting bricks the entire time. When the window was up, he threw his suitcase out and then dove through himself, not caring what was below him, only worried about what was behind him. He landed without too much injury and began to run into a field behind the house towards some lights in the far-off distance. It turned out to be a highway with some military and transport trucks on it. John was able to get a ride to another village where he could catch a train. He didn't bother reporting what had happened to the authorities, since at that time in the Soviet Union, there was a distinct chance that he would have been the one who got in trouble. He just thanked God that he escaped, and decided that the next time he traveled to visit relatives, he would find another way. This happened about 2 weeks after I bought my very first home in December of 2010. I was 22 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was living completely alone. It was exciting, terrifying, and a little overwhelming if I'm being honest. About 9 or 10 days after moving in, my mom and sister convinced me to check out a local animal shelter. They had spotted a Cocker Spaniel in rough shape, an abused, underweight former breeding dog with severely matted fur and a skittish demeanor. He was in rough shape, but something about him tugged at me. I brought him home that same day and named him Jack Donaghy. My 30 Rock fans out there, you know what's up. At the time, he was just this little sad thing, 12 pounds underweight, suffering from worms, and hesitant around people. He had clearly been mistreated for most of his life. I had no idea that less than a week later, he would prove to be my absolute lifesaver. The house I had bought wasn't in the best neighborhood, but it backed up to an elementary school playground, and there were security cameras pointing directly toward my backyard. I figured that added at least a little bit of safety. It was a day or two before Christmas, and my office was closed for the holidays, so I was home alone. The setup of my house was a little odd. My kitchen table sat right by a window that looked out onto my front porch. If you were standing on the porch, you'd be close enough to cast a shadow across the blinds when passing by. The front door was at a 90-degree angle to this window. Across the kitchen was a second living area, which had a side door with a half window attached. The side door was the only window in the house that I hadn't installed blinds on yet. I was sitting at the kitchen table, casually sorting through my mail, when something happened that made my stomach tighten. A swift shadow passed over my bills. The blinds were down, but I could tell that someone was standing way too close to my window. My body immediately tensed up. I didn't know why, but something felt wrong here. No one should have been at my door, and I hadn't heard a car, nor was I expecting any visitors. I quietly slipped off my stool and crouched down, peeking through the tiny gap in the blinds, and that's when my heart jumped into my throat. Sure enough, there were 2 men on my porch. The first man was huge, easily over 6 feet tall, broad, wearing a white t-shirt and jeans. He was standing with his back to me, facing my front door, so I couldn't make out his face. The second man was smaller, wearing a red baseball cap and a ridiculously oversized red shirt. Unlike the first guy, I could clearly see his face, but that didn't mean that I recognized him. For a brief second, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they had a legit reason for being here. A few days earlier, a guy that I thought was a neighbor came by looking for his lost dog. Maybe it was something like that. Then I heard the big one mutter something that keyed me into the fact that they weren't there to borrow some sugar. Fucking go around, man. Immediately, red shirt guy turned and disappeared from my view. I leaned left, craning to see where he went, and that's when I saw him walking towards my side door. The The side door, the one with the half window, was easily the weakest point of entry in my house. It was old, flimsy, and still had single-pane glass from when the house was built in 1955. If he wanted to force his way in, that would be the door to do it at. And just as that horrifying realization hit me, both men started pounding on the door simultaneously. The impact of their fists made the entire house shake. Before I even had time to react, something exploded into motion beside me. Jack, that fragile, abused little cocker spaniel that I had only had a few days, completely lost his mind. He let out the most ferocious snarl and bared his teeth before tearing across the room towards the side door. In our short time together, I had never seen him act like that. And in an instant, the timid dog who had flinched at every noise turned into a guard dog ready to defend his home. His barking was loud, relentless, and vicious. It echoed through every corridor in the house, and I could hear his claws scraping against the floor as he launched himself at the door. That's when I heard Red Shirt yell, "Holy sh! She's got a fucking dog." Then hurried footsteps. I had barely made it to the window in time to see him sprinting away from the side door, bolting through the street. Big Guy didn't seem to waste any time either. He turned and ran just like his partner did. I stayed frozen for a long time, my heart beating so hard that it hurt. I didn't even realize that I was gripping the kitchen counter until my fingers started to ache. Jack, who was still growling, stood at the door with his body tense, waiting for what came next. I'll be honest, I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I filed a report with the police. They took the information, but unsurprisingly, I never heard anything back. Admittedly, there wasn't much they could do, and to my knowledge, those guys never came back to my door. I ended up moving out of that house in 2015, but I never forgot that night. And more importantly, I never forgot what Jack did for me. I firmly believe that he saved me. And if he hadn't been there, if they hadn't hurt him, those men likely would have made it inside. I was alone, I was young, and my house obviously had weak points that could have easily been exploited. Jack has been treated like a king ever since. He's the gentlest, sweetest dog in the world, and unlike most Cocker Spaniels, he even loves kids and has never shown aggression toward anyone after that night. But something tells me that he knew I was his person from the second I brought him home, and he wasn't about to let anyone mess with his human. So, to White Shirt and Red Shirt, wherever you are, let's never meet again, because Jack is still here, and I get the feeling that he's itching to tear your asses up. This happened a few days back, and if I'm being honest, I'm still pretty shaken about it. I only just thought to post it here, so here goes. On Friday afternoon, I got a call from my friend named Sarah, asking if I wanted to meet her and another friend named Lisa at Dunkin' Donuts, as we hadn't seen one another in a while. Dunkin' is about a 15-minute walk from my house, so I decided I'd hoof it. Besides, the weather was beautiful that day. I got to the donut shop and found where Sarah and Lisa were seated, so I went to join them. As we were chatting, I noticed that my sister Elena was seated at a table in the corner of the room with her friend Jess. For a little context, I'm the older brother in this situation. My sister and her friend are both 18. My sister still lives with my parents, whereas I live alone. I excused myself from the group and went over to Elena and Jess's table. They were seated at a table with 3 seats, so I went to sit down and said hey. They both visibly jumped a little bit, but then looked more relieved than anything to see that it was me. Immediately, Elena whispered to me, "Hey, don't look now, but the guy in the blue shirt, I think he's been following me and Jess." I glanced over and I saw a middle-aged man seated at a table facing away from us. He's passed by our table like 5 times in the last 20 minutes to go to the bathroom, but he walks slower when he passes us, she continued. I told them that they were most likely being paranoid and that there was nothing to worry about. But for their peace of mind, I offered to leave with them so they wouldn't feel as worried. I walked back over to my table and explained the situation to Sarah and Lisa. Both of them laughed it off, assuming that my sister was just being paranoid. When, about a minute later, I saw the man get up from his seat and walk towards the bathroom. My eyes followed him, and sure enough, he walked extremely slow past Elena and Jess. In fact, it was almost comical how obviously slow he became. Both Elena and Jess looked in my direction, and I nodded to show them that I had seen what they were talking about. About 5 minutes later, I went to the restroom myself, and on my way, I passed Elena and Jess and told them I was ready to leave whenever they were. They both agreed that they were ready to leave then. I told them that I was just going to the bathroom and that we could leave after I had done my business. Elena had come in her own car, so she was going to give me a lift back. I went into the toilet stall, did said business, washed my hands, and I was making my way back down the corridor into the main eating area when Elena and Jess rushed into the corridor. I asked them what was up, and they explained that another man had joined the strange creeper guy, and that both men were now pointing and staring at them, so they rightfully felt unsafe. We walked back into the eating area. I put money on our table and explained to Lisa and Sarah that I was taking off, and I would explain what was going on when I got home. We all got into Elena's car and left the creeps still in the eating area of Dunkin'. After a 2-minute drive, we reached my house, and just then, I had remembered that I had been meaning to return something I had borrowed from my mom, so I asked if Elena could drive me to my parents' house, as she was going there anyway. I jumped out the car to get what I needed when my phone rang. It was Elena. She explained that a car had driven past and pulled into a driveway. She said the driver of the vehicle was the creep from the donut shop. I looked out my window, and sure enough, there was a car which didn't belong to the owner of the house, parked in my neighbor's driveway. I got the girls to come into my house, and I locked the door behind them. I instructed Elena to take a photo of the car and its license plate, and I told Jess to call 911, as she gave the operator more information than what I could. Elena took the photos, and we sort of gathered around Jess as she was speaking to the operator. She had finished telling the story, and I heard the operator assure us that the police would be at my house shortly. A few minutes pass, and there was a loud knock at the front door, followed by a loud, booming voice shouting, "It's the police." We all had a collective sigh of relief as I went to open the door. Jess told the operator that the police were here, and she hung up. I was in the process of unlocking the door when I thought to look through the peephole at the top. I peered through, and it wasn't a police officer. It was the same creeper from the donut shop. I froze in fear, and I didn't know what to say, but what came out was, "We didn't call the police." I shouted that through the door while simultaneously relocking it. Elena and Jess were both confused as to why I said this. "We had a call, sir," the man on the other side of the door shouted. I told him that he had the wrong address, and I informed the girls that it was the creep at the door and not an actual cop. Both were shocked and visibly frightened, and I'm not going to lie, I was too. I was about to tell Jess to call the police again until I heard the sirens. "Sir, you have to let me in," the man shouted again, and this time I didn't answer. He was now pounding on the door, his commands for me to let him in now morphing into begging and pleading. I heard the police car pull up, as well as some commotion outside, and then an actual police officer knocked on the door. I let him in after checking through the peephole once more. 2 police officers had taken the man into custody, while another cop took Elena and Jess into the dining room for some brief questioning. I called my parents, and Jess called hers. Both were at my house extremely quickly once we told them what had happened. The man at the door was found with a kitchen knife on his person, as well as other weapons in his car. Who knows what could have happened if I hadn't looked through that peephole first. Both my sister and her friend are fine, but it's safe to say that we were all rattled after it. I'm just glad that I was there when it seems like my sister needed me the most. This happened when I was a bartender about 6 years back. For the record, I'm a female, and I was around 26 at the time. I think about this often, as it's changed the way that I choose to operate within my life. I now refuse to go to any store alone after midnight, and this story will explain why. On a busy Friday night, I was bartending with the bar manager, and he had noticed that we were low on some bar necessities after the dinner rush. Think lemons, limes, bitters, those sorts of things. So I was sent out to go to a 24-hour grocery store down the road to pick up the odds and ends that we would require to get through the weekend. I picked up everything that was asked of me without trouble at the store. That is, until I got to the liquor aisle. There were two country-looking guys that were probably around my age in the aisle, and they were staring at me, whispering to each other in a way that made me feel uncomfortable. I assumed they were making comments about me, which in and of itself is pretty innocent so far. But before they could approach me, I grabbed what I needed and power walked to the self-checkout. I really booked it out of there because when you're a bartender, it's kind of like you're on stage and you're required to be charming and interact with people that you otherwise absolutely wouldn't be able to tolerate unless you're getting paid to. Thus, why I'm not a bartender anymore. I get to the self-checkout, and hot on my tail are those two guys. I'm scanning my stuff, and they use the scanning station right next to me. I get a better look at them now that they're basically within my bubble. One is taller, muscular, and average-looking at best. The other is shorter and much more plump. They both looked dirty, and their eyes were completely bloodshot. Not sure if they were high on something, or maybe they'd already been drinking for a while. They continued to stare at me, and our eyes awkwardly met. So I did the pleasant, Midwesterny thing to do, and flashed them a quick, half-assed, closed-lipped smile to be polite. The taller one takes that as an invitation to start talking to me. "Hey, looks like you're ready to party, huh?" I replied with something like, "Yeah, something like that. It's not for me, though." That's when they take a step closer to me and ignore their own responsibility to scan their items. "Oh, must be for your boyfriend, huh?" I flash that same awkward, tight-lipped smile again and roll my eyes slightly. Like, this is your hint that I'm not interested, fellas. The taller one continues to try to talk to me. "You could come hang out with us tonight. We could show you a real good time if you know what I mean." I reply with, "No thanks, I'm good. I have plans already." Well, the tall one starts to get upset that his moves aren't working like he'd hoped, and he starts using a more threatening tone and moves very close to me, almost 2 inches away. But I ignore him, staying focused on the scanner. I don't think he had showered in a few days by the smell of him. He gets a little louder and says, "Oh, I see how it is. You probably only doctors and rich men like that. You think you're too good for us. We can show you that you aren't. We can teach you a lesson." Now, I'm not exactly sure in what context he meant, but it definitely wasn't good. Still not looking at him, I turn away so my body is blocking his view of my purse, which I'd set on the scanner, in order to grab my 4-inch pocket knife and slide it up my jacket sleeve, in case I need to actively protect myself. The whole time I'm acting like I'm searching for my wallet. I do this, however, in view of the self-scan worker standing at her podium, and look at her with wide eyes, trying to communicate that I don't feel safe and I might need help. I turn back to the machine and slide my credit card to pay, while the creepy and hostile guys are practically standing on top of me. The machine malfunctions and starts beeping loudly. The lady worker comes over immediately, and the guys standing next to me change their expressions from, "I'm planning to torture you for a couple of days and toss your body into a creek," to, "Just your friendly good old country boys making polite conversation over here." They actually try to act like I knew them and we were friends. That way the worker wouldn't be alerted to their ill intentions. They tried joking with the worker herself, saying I must have been stealing something, and that's why the machine went off. This lady worker was definitely not buying it. She was a tall woman, probably pushing 6 feet herself, with a little muscle on her by the way. I wouldn't mess with her on my best day. But she presses a few buttons on the screen, shooting the guys a very unimpressed look when they were trying to act charming, and she cancels the order completely. She turns to me and says, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am, but this machine seems to be not working correctly. Why don't you gather your things and I'll ring you up at an actual register." She puts her hand on my back and gives me that same wide-eyed look that I had given her a minute earlier, letting me know that she saw that I was in danger. I pick up my things to follow her to a register that's near the security office. The guys linger around self-scan, still glaring at me, and eventually they complete their purchase. but stand right at the exit. I can only assume that they're waiting for me. I felt like I would be walking to my death if I made my exit in that moment. The worker keeps a close eye on the guys as she scans my items. As she's scanning, she tells me there really wasn't anything wrong with the machine I was using. It just misread my credit card. She said, I had a bad feeling about those guys from the moment they walked in, and then I saw them getting aggressive with you. I had already rang security to be ready to walk out to the parking lot and make sure you got there safely when you were ready. Then I saw you take that knife out and put it up your sleeve. Good job. As much as I'd like to see you show them that they picked the wrong chick to mess with, I'm glad I was able to pull you aside and make sure you're safe. I see them waiting by the door for you. I'm just going to keep pressing buttons on the screen and acting like I'm having trouble with your order until they give up and go outside. Our security officer and I are both still going to escort you to your vehicle when you leave. I thought to myself, this woman seriously deserves a raise. I thanked her over and over again and told her what they had said to me. I was getting afraid because I don't know what these guys are capable of. As I'm talking to her, my bar manager calls me to see what's taking so long. I explain what was happening, and he was obviously very concerned, almost ready to come up there himself and kick some ass. By the time I hang up, the guys had given up and walked out to the parking lot. The worker said maybe we should give it another few minutes because she had a feeling that they may still be in the parking lot waiting for me to walk out just to see which vehicle was mine. They'd likely follow me if that were the case. My instant thought was, no way, they have to be gone by now. But I was wrong. The worker and security guard escort me out, and as it was after midnight, you can imagine how empty the parking lot was. Towards the back of the lot, there sat this big old pickup truck running with the lights on, pointed directly at the store. It was a huge parking lot, and it wouldn't have made sense for whoever that was to initially park like that. So I'm assuming they moved the truck to sit that way, just so they'd have a full view of when I exited the store and headed to my car. It was like I was being stalked by some very hungry, very methy lions. When I unlocked my car, and they saw that me, the worker, and the guard were looking directly at them, and that I wasn't getting into my car until we watched them leave, then they peeled out of the parking lot. I mean, they seriously did a burnout to establish that they were pissed and trying to intimidate us or something. Aw, poor creeps didn't get what they wanted. Boo-hoo. I thanked the worker and the guard over and over again, as I'm certain they had just saved my life, or at least saved me from having to live with whatever those guys were planning on doing to me. I ended up writing a long letter to the store manager and to their corporate location, describing how their employees protected me, and highlighting just how grateful I was. I really hoped that earned her a promotion, bonus, or raise. This woman didn't know me at all, and was ready to protect me, which really isn't her job, but she made sure to do it anyway. Like I said at the beginning, I don't go late night shopping by myself anymore. This experience will make sure that I never do that again. This happened about 2 years back. It was late at night, and I was driving to work. 5 hours on the road ahead of me. Nothing but darkness and the hum of my engine to keep me company. After about 3 hours on the road, exhaustion started creeping in. I pulled into a gas station, grabbed a coffee and some snacks before hitting the road again. But coffee and snacks can only do so much. It wasn't long after that I started fighting to keep my eyes open. The road itself was dead, just an empty stretch of asphalt cutting through an endless pine forest. No other cars, no streetlights beyond the occasional glow of distant road signs. Just me, the darkness, and the occasional thud of bugs smashing against my windshield. I tried playing my music louder. I tried turning the AC all the way up, but it didn't matter, because eventually, my head nodded forward, and I snapped myself back awake, heart slamming against my ribs, realizing that I had almost nearly fallen asleep at the wheel. That was it. I knew that I had to sleep. There was no way I could keep going like this. I wasn't going to make it another 2 hours to a proper rest stop, or to my job. I needed to pull over, and I knew that I needed to do it soon. I kept scanning the side of the road, desperate for anywhere to pull over. This went on for maybe 5-10 miles before I spotted a small pocket on the roadside. I don't really think that it was a designed turnout, just a spot where, over time, I'm sure dozens of cars have either turned around or come to a stop at. But at this point, I didn't care. I pulled in, turned my engine off, and rolled down my window slightly to listen for any signs of life. Nothing. It was pretty much complete silence. Not a single car had passed me in the last half hour, and the only thing moving was the breeze through the trees. I mean, this place was empty. I convinced myself that this place was as safe as any. No one was out there, and if anyone did come by, it would likely just be the cops checking on me. But just to be sure, I locked the doors, adjusted my seat to recline fully, took off my shoes, and placed them on the passenger seat. And then shut my eyes, and before I even realized it, I was out. At that point, I don't know how long I was asleep for, but it was a bright light that woke me up. My eyes weren't even open yet, but that light felt like it was piercing through my eyelids, blinding me before I could even process what was happening. At first, I thought it was a flashlight, thinking someone must have pulled up and was checking on me. Maybe a cop. Maybe just some good Samaritan. But as my vision adjusted, I realized that it wasn't coming from a flashlight. These were high beams, coming from a car parked directly behind me. Seeing this shook me awake. I glanced in my side view mirror, and that's when I saw a man walking up towards my car. He was walking slowly, but obviously with a purpose. And for a split second, my half-awake brain tried to rationalize what I was seeing. I was still holding out hope that this was just a regular police officer. But as he reached the driver's side back door, I saw his hand grip the handle, and then he yanked it. This shot my stomach right up into my mouth. He wasn't knocking. He wasn't trying to get my attention. He was trying to break into my car, and for the moment, I was trapped. My seat was fully reclined, pushed back as far as it could go, which made it impossible for me to reach the pedals. I felt vulnerable lying there, with this man violently yanking on my door handle, trying to force his way inside. My body acted before my brain could even catch up. I slammed my hand down on the car horn, shattering the silence of nature with a deafening blast. That must have startled the guy, because he jumped back from the car and let go of the handle for just a second. And that's all the space I needed. I yanked my seat forward, but not exactly into the proper driving position. I had to pull myself towards the steering wheel. My upper body awkwardly hunched forward, scrambling for the keys in the ignition. The man was still there, and he had obviously regained his composure, but now he knew that I wasn't going down easy. I didn't give him the chance to try again. With my backside barely even touching the seat, I twisted my body as much as I could. I managed to start the engine, and I slammed my foot down on the gas. My tires screeched against the pavement, sending up a cloud of dust and smoke as I got back onto the road. As I sped away, my body was shaking. I think I was powered by pure adrenaline at that point, and I dared to glance at my rearview mirror. That man was still standing there, only now he wasn't alone. There were two more figures that had emerged from the darkness, stepping into the beams of his car's headlights. One of them was holding something, a long, heavy-looking object. A wrench, a crowbar, a bat. I couldn't tell from where I was, but I knew that I was happy to not find out. If I hadn't woken up in time, if I had just slept a little longer, I don't think I would have been driving away. Whoever this was, they had planned this, and I was their target. I drove off as fast as I could, way past the speed limit, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. For almost 30 minutes, I didn't let up. I didn't slow down, I didn't stop. And finally, when I felt like I was far enough away, I pulled into the first gas station I saw, my hands still trembling as I readjusted my seat and finally put my shoes back on. I sat there for a while trying to calm myself, realizing just how close I had come to being robbed, attacked, or worse. When I looked down at my car's clock, that's when it hit me. I had only been asleep for 10 minutes. That's all the time it took for them to find me, surround me, and try to break in. At that point, sleep was no longer a problem. I drove the rest of the way to work wide awake, not stopping until I was inside the facility, which is surrounded by fencing and security alarms. That morning when my boss pulled in, I told him what had happened. His reaction? Not shock, not disbelief, just a nod, as if this is a tale that he'd heard before. Apparently, this wasn't a random event. The country where I live has a name for these kinds of criminals. We call them road pirates. They target drivers who pull over in remote areas, forcing them out of their cars and stealing everything. Their phones, valuables, wallets, even their vehicles. That stretch of road, one of their prime hunting grounds. Looking back on this, could it have been 3 guys just checking on me? Maybe, but if that were the case, why wouldn't they just knock on my window? Why'd they feel the need to sneak up from behind? And why was one of them holding something in his hand? I don't personally believe in coincidences. I got lucky that night. And next time, I won't be taking that same chance. Be safe out there. This is technically my mother's story, but I was there too. I was only 4 months old at the time, and too young to remember any of it. But the way my mom has told it over the years has definitely etched the details into my mind. It was 1994, and my parents were struggling financially. Money was always tight, and my father was working as many hours as he could, often coming home late into the evening. This particular Wednesday night was one of those occasions. My mom had spent the whole day alone with me, tending to the usual chores that come with a newborn. Feeding, changing, rocking, all while trying to keep the house in order. And by the time the sun had set, I'm sure exhaustion had set in. It had been a long day, and she was ready for my father to get home so she could have a moment to finally breathe. She had just finished bringing in laundry from the outside wash line when she heard a knock at the door. It was around 9 p.m., roughly the time that my dad would get home if he worked OT. In fact, my mom's first thought was that my dad had forgotten his keys. It had happened before, and in her tired state, she didn't think much more about it. She put me down in the living room bassinet and made her way to the front door. And without checking, she opened it. And standing there on the porch was a man that she didn't recognize. He was about 5'9" or 5'10", slender in build, with dark hair and dark eyes. My mom always said that his clothes were clean, but they were wrinkled as if he had been wearing them for far too long. He flashed her a timid smile and then he spoke. "Hey, my car broke down just up the road. Do you mind if I use your phone?" My mom would always tell us that there was something off about his voice. It was too casual, too smooth, almost as if this was something he had rehearsed 1,000 times. My mom was caught off guard by this request, and instinctively, she took one step back to point at the phone in the hallway that was no more than a step within the door. She said, "Yeah, sure, the phone's right here," as I'm sure that she was still trying to process the situation. But this man took the invitation and he didn't stop at the phone. He kept walking right into our house, past the table, and right at my mom. That's what it took for something inside of my mom to snap her to attention. She realized that this wasn't right. The stranger was now inside the house and stepping further into the hallway and closing the space between them. She tried to play it cool, pointing again at the phone, saying that he could use it right there. But instead of stopping, he just tilted his head at her, looking almost like a curious animal, before that timid smile that he had changed into something darker. That's when my mom implored him to just use the phone and go, saying that her husband was in the shower and that he'd be awfully upset when he got out. This got the man to stop in his tracks, but after a quick moment of silence, he said, "I don't hear a shower running." My mother's stomach dropped when she realized that he had called her bluff. "I think you're home alone." To this, every hair on her body stood on end. Panic flooded through her, and all she could do was think about me, just a few feet away from her in the living room. She wanted to run to me, grab me up, and head for the safety of the bathroom. Hell, she said that she even thought about throwing me out the window if she had to, and screaming for help. But then she thought about how no one would hear her, and no one would come. That's when she heard the growl. It was low at first, deep and rumbling, and it sounded far off, but it was coming from the kitchen. In that moment, our 2-year-old Doberman named Pride appeared. She was a big dog, strong, and while I wouldn't say she was trained, she knew who her family was, and she knew who wasn't in that group. Her ears were flat, muscles tensed, with her eyes locked on the stranger standing in the hallway. And then she bared her teeth, with that slow, deliberate, and unmistakable snarl. My mom had never seen our dog like this before. Pride wasn't just growling. She was waiting, either waiting for my mother's signal, or waiting for that man to take one more step forward. But he froze, and for the first time, that fake confidence that he had shattered. My mom said, "You need to get out now." She pointed to the door and stepped closer to our dog, letting the man know that if he so much as flinched in the wrong direction, Pride would be on top of him. That's when the man took a step back, and then another, and without a word, when he reached the doorway, he closed it behind him. My mother locked it and collapsed against the wall, heart basically running a marathon in her chest. She then ran to the bassinet and swooped me up so tightly that she remembers me struggling against her grip. When my dad got home 20 minutes later, my mom was still shaking. She told him everything. He searched the street, the yard, and even went down the road to see if there was really a broken down car. But obviously there was nothing. There was no car, there was never a stranded man in need of help. Just a predator, looking for the right house, the right moment, and the right victim. The scary thing was that he almost found one. The cops were called, but the man was never caught. He never returned, and my mom never saw him again. But that didn't mean that the fear ever really left. For years, she would check the locks 3-4 times before bed. That was the last time she'd ever opened the door without checking first. And Pride now slept with my parents in their bedroom. Because she knew what almost happened that night. And she knew that if it hadn't been for Pride, things could have ended very differently. Pride lived until she was 13 years old, and for every single one of those years, she was spoiled beyond belief. She had a warm bed right next to my mom, the best food, constant attention, and more love than any dog could ever ask for, because my mom never forgot. She never forgot that when she was alone and vulnerable and scared out of her mind, it wasn't luck that saved her. It was Pride. And I don't know what would have happened to either of us without her. I'm going to go back more than 30 years to tell this story. In my early 20s, I worked as a burlesque entertainer in a gentleman's club, and one night I was idly sitting at the end of the bar when I saw a couple come in. That, in and of itself, wasn't unusual. I had no contact with them and thought nothing of their being there until later that week. A few days after that night, the doorman at the club handed me a piece of paper that had 2 names and phone numbers written on it. The names were Laura and Richard. I was supposed to call one of them, so I picked Laura. She told me that they had been the couple who'd been at the bar the other night, and they'd noticed me, thought that I'd be perfect for a part in a movie that Richard was producing. She asked if I'd be up for a meeting. Well, 22-year-old me said of course. The details that I got made it seem on the level, so who wouldn't want to be a movie star at that age? I was told Richard would pick me up the next night at 7, and for me to wear something wild. 7 o'clock came the next evening, and I was ready in a white lace dress with ostrich feather trim when Richard showed up outside my building. So I went down, introduced myself, and got in the car. We agreed to go to a local bar that I knew well for the meeting. But first, we had to go back to his place so he could pick up some contracts that he'd forgotten. So off we went. Once we landed, he went into the house and came back out with a few manila envelopes, as well as an open bottle of beer that he said was for me. It was a brand that I didn't drink, and plus, it's against the law to drink alcohol in a vehicle here. So I stuck the beer into the window well of his Jeep, and we went to the bar. Once there, he showed me what were supposedly scripts from this movie that he was making, as well as some contracts. It all looked pretty legit. Richard was nice, hospitable, and very welcoming. This only made me even more interested in the role. I remembered that I'd made some plans to go out later with my soon-to-be boyfriend, so I excused myself from Richard in order to go call my boyfriend from the bar's payphone. I took the Corona that I'd ordered from the bar with me to the bank of phones. As a dancer, I'd been taught by the other older girls to never let your drink out of your sight. My boyfriend wanted to head to another club, so I went back to the table where Richard was and told him that I had to go. He didn't like that and tried a few different tactics to get me to go to the movie set with him, saying I could meet Mickey Rourke and check out the set. But all I really wanted to do was meet my boyfriend, so I declined. I took Richard's card and left. Now, after that night, I never heard from Richard again. But a couple of months later, the police came around to the bar that I was working at. They had 2 big books of mugshots and a stack of Polaroids with them. They wanted to talk to all of us girls about a predator couple who had been setting up meetings with dancers by saying that they were in the film industry, before drugging and assaulting them. They showed me the 2 mugshot books and asked if I saw anyone I recognized in the pictures. I immediately identified Richard and Laura. Then they showed me the Polaroids, which were trophy pictures of the couple in the act of attacking the poor drugged girls, before they asked if I knew any of the victims and where the authorities might find them. Sadly enough, I knew a couple of the women in the photographs, but even worse, there were a lot more that this had happened to that I didn't recognize. Richard and Laura were ultimately prosecuted. He went to prison, but she didn't, because she was from a wealthy family, and she had also turned witness on him. About 12 years after Richard was convicted, I saw in the newspaper that he was up for the possibility of parole. So I wrote a letter to the parole board telling this exact story and urging them to not let him back out, because this man's a dangerous offender who should have to stay in prison for the entirety of his sentence, if not his life. I flashed back to that night. If I drank that open beer that he handed me in his Jeep on the way to that meeting, I wouldn't have made it to the meeting and would probably have ended up in that stack of Polaroids. Girls and guys, always keep an eye on your drinks. Have fun out there, but you have to be careful. For any of you that may be interested, the real name of the man from this first-hand account is Selva Kumar Subbiah, and I've included a link in the description to an article highlighting all of his deplorable acts. It's not an easy read, so I encourage you all to use discretion if you'd like to learn the details of his crimes. I'd like to give a little background information about myself to set up this story. This happened about 10 years back. I'm a guy, and at the time, I was a young gay male living in a medium-sized city. The dating scene itself was rather limited, and most gay people use apps or websites for meeting others, for encounters of a certain kind. I frequent websites and apps daily just to see if there's anyone new out there that I haven't already spoken to, but I rarely actually meet anyone from online. The fear of STIs or being robbed has always been in the back of my mind, so I generally just browse without ever actually meeting up. But that changed when browsing Craigslist, I found an ad that seemed to be somewhat what I was looking for. The post was by a man just a little older than myself who seemed to want the same things that I wanted. He wanted to meet up with a guy my age and get to know one another over drinks, maybe a little cuddle session. Whatever else may follow was just between consenting adults. After responding to this ad, the guy and I talked for about a month through texting without ever making solid plans to meet. I finally got up the confidence and asked if he wanted to hang out. He agreed, and we decided that I'd drive to his place, which was about 10 miles from me and outside of the city limits. The day that we decided to meet, it was getting late. It was already nearly 6 p.m. The sun was still somewhat out, but it was growing darker by the minute. I got in my car and drove out to the area where he lived. The guy texted me and said that he'd be walking on the side of the road because he was coming back from visiting with another friend, and he asked if I would pick him up to head back to his place. He had told me before that he had 2 kids that lived with him, but that the kid's mother wasn't in the picture. He said that his kids were at a friend's house and they'd be back later, so we'd have the place to ourselves. Well, while making my way to the guy's house, I saw him walking on the side of the road. He was holding a large speaker and covered in a hoodie, which seemed strange because it wasn't cold at all where we live. The road we were on was very much outside of the city. It was nearly a dirt road, with random trailers set up every acre or so. I stopped the car alongside of him and said something friendly like, "Hey stranger, need a ride?" He didn't smile. He just opened the door and got into my car without saying a word. I thought that this was strange because we had literally spent a month having friendly chats, and I'd figured that he'd act happy to see me, or at least not be awkward about it. After picking him up and making my way to his house, he then tells me to turn around and head back to the main road. He wanted to get a blunt and some alcohol so that we could chill together. So, not thinking anything strange at this point, I agree and head back the other way. While on this long dirt road with no streetlights, he mentions that his power is out at his house and asks if that's okay with me. I was slightly thrown by this, but I said, sure, as long as you have candles or some light source. He didn't say a thing, just kept looking straight ahead like I never said anything at all. And then I thought, what about your kids? How are children living in a house with no power? So I asked him, and this is where things start to go sideways. He replied, "Oh, they're staying with my mom for a while." But he had told me a few days ago that his kids lived with him. No mother. Questions ran through my mind, but I didn't feel like I was in trouble. Yet. We arrived at the store, and he got out of my car with his head tucked in his hoodie, almost like he was hiding from somebody. This seemed strange. But he got back in the car after making his purchase, and while traveling back to his place, which was another 15-minute or so drive, he then told me, "I had to sling crack to get this money for us to hang out tonight." I was surprised because I didn't ask this, and he randomly admitted it. The situation was now sketch, so I asked if he had protection, just in case we did decide that we needed them. He said no, so I dropped him off at another store nearby before restarting our journey down that long dirt road. Now, after all the inconsistent and strange behaviors coming from this guy, I just really wanted to get out of the situation as fast as I could. When he got out of my car at the second store, I thought this could be my out. I could just drive away and block his number and be done with the situation. After he walked in, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do at this point. I wanted to just drive away, but I didn't want to leave somebody stranded. I finally got up the nerve to leave, but this huge speaker that he had brought was sitting on my floorboard. I wanted nothing connecting me with this person, and I feared that he might possibly say that I stole the speaker if I drove off. So I got out of my car, ran to the passenger side, and started dragging the speaker out of my car. That's when I heard, "What are you doing?" It was him. He was now right behind me. Fear shot through my entire body, like I'd been caught stealing something or lying about a bad grade to my parents. I told him, "Oh, I was just going to move this to the back seat. That way you'd have more room in the car." Quick save, and he seemed to have bought the horrible explanation. But now he's right back in my car, and my only out is now gone. So we're driving down that old dark dirt road, and all that's going through my mind is, how do I get out of this alive? I'm trying to catch him in another lie to see if this is actually happening or just my imagination. But I can't seem to get any information out of him. He just sits beside me looking straight ahead, fidgeting with something in his pockets. It's as though he has a mission to complete, and I'm only there to bring him to it. After about 15 minutes down this road, I notice there are no longer any trailers. The road is pitch black, only lit up by my headlights. I ask him if his place is coming up, because the navigation said it would be right here. He tells me, "Oh, the address that I gave you is an old business of mine. My address doesn't show up on Google Maps for some reason. Okay, red alert. I started panicking, just knowing that I was about to be robbed or killed in a few moments. I slowed the car down and racked my brain thinking of anything that could get me out at this point. I told him that my best friend was waiting for me to get back to have drinks with her. I said that I didn't realize we'd be driving so much and that it would take this long. I'm not sure if he bought this excuse or not, but I told him that I texted my friend the address he gave me so she'd know how long I would be out and when to expect me back for our planned night out. He seemed to trust my explanation but was irritated by it. He said, "Well, can't we just have a little car fun real quick then? Nobody lives out here, so nobody will even see us." "No, I'm sorry. My friend is going to be pissed, and she already called me once when you were in the store." I told her that I'd only be about 30 minutes. Frankly, I was ready to abandon my car at this point if he pulled out a knife or anything other than a gun. But luckily, he just kind of huffed before he got out of the car, slammed the door shut, and started to put his head in the window to tell me something. I hit the gas and turned the wheel, leaving nothing but a cloud of smoke behind me. I couldn't see him in the rearview mirror due to the darkness of the night, but I imagine he might have been flipping me off or coughing from the dust plume made by my tires. After pulling myself together and realizing that I might have been on the next Serial podcast, I called my friend, who wasn't actually waiting for me. I called my mom, my sister, and pretty much everyone else that I loved, and told them a slimmed-down version of the story that took place that night. I teared up a little thinking that I could have almost died, but overcame that thought pretty quickly. When I got home that evening, I decided to pull up the address that he gave me. I noticed that about 2 miles down the road, there was one single house sitting alone with no neighbors. The road was a dead end. I then used Google Street View and saw that the house was completely abandoned. No doors, and just boarded up windows. I Googled the actual address of that house and found out that it was posted for sale about 5 years back and was still on the market. I'm guessing nobody wants to purchase a possible crack house. My friends told me later that they imagined that he wanted to get me to the house and do whatever he wanted. Since there'd be no traffic that far down the road, I'm sure it would take quite a while to find a body that went missing. After all of this, I vowed to myself to never meet anyone else from Craigslist ever again. I even vowed to just never leave my house, but school and work made that impossible. All in all, I'm okay with what happened, considering that it could have been so much worse. But it really brought to light what could happen when you put yourself in sketchy spots. Imagine waking up in a hospital bed one day. That sterile hospital smell fills your nose. The constant beeping of machines around you. Your eyes flutter open, doing what they can to adjust to that bright fluorescent lighting. That's when a nurse leans over and asks, "Sir or madam, do you know your name?" You open your mouth, but the words don't come. You have no idea who you are, where you are, or how you got there. Now imagine that when you finally do speak, the words that come out aren't even in your native language. Now, this isn't the setup for some psychological thriller. This really happened to a man named Michael Boatwright in 2013. But Michael wasn't a victim of a coma or a head injury. No accident, no documented trauma. One day, he was a run-of-the-mill 61-year-old American man living his life. The next, he had no memory of who he was and could only speak fluent Swedish. And no one, not doctors, not police, not even Michael Boatwright himself, could explain why. On February 28, 2013, staff at the Desert Regional Medical Center in Palm Springs, California, found themselves dealing with a strange case. An older man had been discovered unconscious in a motel room. There was no immediate sign of injury, no drugs or alcohol in his system, also no identification on him. He was found unresponsive and alone in the room. Paramedics took him to the hospital, where he eventually regained consciousness, but when he did, this is where the oddities began. He had no idea who he was. He didn't recognize his own reflection, and he couldn't tell doctors anything about his past. When asked basic questions in English, he would stare blankly at whoever was speaking, seeming as if he didn't understand a word. Then he began to talk, although not in English, in fluent Swedish. Even though all available records confirmed that this man was an American, he spoke, thought, and behaved like a native Swede. When authorities finally identified him using fingerprints, they found out that he was a 61-year-old retired U.S. Navy veteran from Florida named Michael Boatwright. But when they told him his name, he flatly rejected it. He claimed his name was Johan Ek, and that he wasn't from Florida. He was from Sweden. It was clear that this was more than just memory loss. This man had had a complete identity shift. Before he became a mystery patient in a California hospital, Mr. Boatwright had lived a relatively normal, though somewhat nomadic life. He was born in Florida in 1952, served in the U.S. Navy, and had spent years working as a tennis coach. He had traveled a lot during his life, had a few failed relationships, and at some point had even spent time in Sweden back in the 80s and 90s. But despite having that one tie to the country, he was never fluent in the language. There was no obvious reason why his English would completely disappear and be replaced by Swedish. Even more bizarre, any hint of an American accent was gone. Doctors, nurses, and speech pathologists noted that when Boatwright spoke, he didn't sound like someone who had learned a second language. He sounded as if he'd been speaking this way his entire life. It was as if the entire existence of Michael Boatwright had been erased and replaced by a completely different person. Yet, after doctors ran all the tests they could, there was no evidence of brain damage, a stroke, or dementia. Nothing that would easily explain how something like this could happen. Doctors finally diagnosed him with transient global amnesia, or TGA, and dissociative fugue, two rare conditions that involve sudden memory loss and, in extreme cases, the formation of completely different identities. It's worth noting that even among cases of dissociative fugue, this case was even more unusual. Most people with dissociative fugue eventually recover their memories. Their true identity eventually resurfaces. But in the case of Michael Boatwright, those things never occurred. This was not just a case of someone waking up confused for a few hours or a few days. This was a permanent mental shift. What's more, he never once wavered on his name being Johan Ek. His Swedish fluency never faded, and his past as an American never returned to him. With no memory of his life before this, Boatwright was stranded. Authorities couldn't find any living relatives to help him. He had no known family, no home, and basically nowhere to go. For a while, he was placed in a homeless shelter in Palm Springs. He was given some assistance, but it was clear that he had nowhere to belong. His Swedish identity didn't exist in any official capacity, and his American identity, well, that meant nothing to him. He was a man without a past, without a future, and clearly without a home. Journalists eventually caught wind of this bizarre case, and for a brief time, he became a viral mystery. The Swedish media picked up on the story, and Boatwright was even interviewed. And yes, it was completely in Swedish. Still, after all the attention that his story got, no one could explain how this had happened. Unfortunately, even with his newfound celebrity status and the efforts of others to help him, Boatwright's life never fully recovered. In December of 2014, about a year and a half after waking up as a new man, Boatwright passed away at the age of 62. To this day, it's not exactly known how he passed, given that his death was never widely reported, and no family ever came forward to claim his remains. His story simply faded away. The man who woke up as Johan Ek, the man who spent his final years insisting that he was not Michael Boatwright, died without ever being able to remember the life that he had lost. More than 10 years later now, we're left to wonder what really happened to Michael Boatwright. Was this truly a rare case of dissociative fugue? triggered by something that we may never understand. It's likely that we'll never know, but I'm interested in what you think about this case. What we do know is that somewhere in Florida, there's a birth certificate with the name Michael Boatwright on it. And yet, the man whose birth certificate that was, the man who died back in 2014, the man who took his last breath believing himself to be someone else, went to his grave as Johann Eck, a man with no past, no home, and leaving us with no real answers. On the morning of September 29, 1982, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman of Schaumburg, Illinois, a small township near Chicago, woke up feeling sick, and like most kids her age, she went to her parents and told them she wasn't feeling well. They did what any parent would do. They went to the medicine cabinet, grabbed a household staple, and gave Mary one extra-strength Tylenol capsule to help her with her symptoms. It should have been nothing of note. This is something millions of people take every day without a second thought. But just a few hours later, Mary would be dead. At that exact same time, about 10 miles north of Schaumburg, 27-year-old Adam Janis, a postal worker, also found himself reaching for a Tylenol, hoping to ease a headache. But within minutes of taking the pill, he collapsed on the ground. Within a half hour, Adam was at a hospital, where he would die soon after. Later that day, Adam's family would get together at his house in Arlington Heights, just trying to process the sudden and unexpected death of their loved one. Under the weight of this tragedy, Adam's brother Stanley and his wife Teresa both took Tylenol from the same bottle that Adam had, and within hours, they were gone too. Just like that, 3 members of the same family, gone in an instant. And no one knew why, but it would be clear shortly that this was far from an accident. Elsewhere in the Chicago area, more people were dying under equally bizarre and horrifying circumstances. 35-year-old Mary Lynn Reiner, a mother of 4 from Winfield, Illinois, took Tylenol to help her recover after giving birth to her 4th child. She would be found dead in her home. 31-year-old Paula Prince, a flight attendant, stopped at a Walgreens in Chicago to grab a bottle of Tylenol after a long work trip. She was found in her apartment days later, an open bottle of Tylenol sitting right there on the bathroom counter. And unfortunately, the list goes on. 27-year-old Mary McFarland took Tylenol while at work in Elmhurst, Illinois. She collapsed soon after and died before anyone even knew what had happened. All of these cases were happening within hours of each other, all in the greater Chicago area. At first, no one had any clue about what was going on. Was it a bad batch of Tylenol? A contaminated supply, maybe? It wasn't until investigators put all the pieces together that they learned that someone was actively poisoning Tylenol. The deaths weren't accidents. They weren't bad luck. They were murders. A toxicology report confirmed that the victims had ingested Tylenol capsules laced with cyanide, a lethal poison that cuts off the body's ability to absorb oxygen. A single dose is enough to kill a person in short order. But the scariest part about this whole thing? The poisonings weren't happening at the factory. It turned out that the tainted Tylenol bottles came from multiple stores in the area, meaning someone had to have bought them, tampered with them, and then put them back on the shelves for random, unsuspecting people to purchase. There was no pattern to the stores, no pattern to the victims. It was pure, indiscriminate terror. Authorities moved fast, though. They issued urgent warnings to the public, telling people to stop taking Tylenol immediately. They flooded stores, pulling every single bottle off the shelves. This would be the first time in U.S. history that an over-the-counter medication had become a weapon of mass murder. At the center of this disaster was Johnson & Johnson, the manufacturer of Tylenol and one of the most trusted brands in America. Instead of denying responsibility or attempting to downplay the situation, the company did something that no one expected. 31 million bottles of Tylenol were immediately recalled, costing the company well over $100 million. Johnson & Johnson also completely shut down production of Tylenol. They offered to replace all Tylenol capsules in the market with safer, solid tablets. They even introduced the first ever tamper-proof packaging, the same safety seals we see on medications today. Before this incident, what would eventually be called the Tylenol murders, medications didn't have safety seals. Bottles were sold with just a cotton ball inside, making them extremely easy to open and manipulate. From that moment, the US government made tamper-resistant packaging a requirement for all over-the-counter drugs. This case literally changed how we buy medicine. With the entire country in shock now, the hunt for the person responsible was on. The FBI, local police, and federal investigators all launched an intense manhunt. They examined thousands of leads together, interviewed hundreds of suspects, and tested countless Tylenol bottles from different stores. They found a handful of other poison bottles out there, but no solid evidence to track down the killer. That's when they got a lead. Actually, the lead landed right in their laps. A man named James William Lewis sent a letter to Johnson & Johnson, claiming he would stop the poisonings in exchange for $1 million. This letter made Lewis public enemy number one. Authorities arrested him immediately. I mean, he had admitted to poisoning all these meds, right? But there was a huge problem. There was zero physical evidence linking him to the actual poisonings. Turns out that he likely had absolutely nothing to do with them. He was simply trying to extort the company. Lewis was a con artist and had a long criminal history. And no matter how much the police wanted to pin this tragedy on him, they couldn't prove he was the one who tampered with the bottles. They had nothing to tie him to it. Lewis was ultimately convicted only of extortion and sentenced to 13 years in prison. And with that, the case remained open. To this day, no one has ever been charged with the Tylenol murders. There have been theories. Some investigators still believe James Lewis was responsible, but without any proof, it's just a theory. Others think the killer was someone who wanted to cause chaos, knowing that there was no way that this could be traced back to them, and they would never be caught. But the most chilling possibility of all, the real killer may have simply stopped after the national panic. They may still indeed be out there. 4 decades later, the Tylenol murders are still one of the most terrifying unsolved crimes in American history. It wasn't just random cases of murder. It was a fundamental attack on public trust. It forced people to question something they had never feared before. The idea that something as simple as taking a painkiller could be the last thing that you ever do. Even today, new investigators still revisit the case, looking at old evidence with new technology, just hoping to catch a break. But for now, the person who poisoned Mary Kellerman, the Janus family, and several others got away with murder. And unless new evidence ever emerges, they always will. In the early 2000s, Blake Ruff, a quiet, soft-spoken man from Texas, met a woman named Lori Erica Kennedy at a Bible study group. At first glance, Blake was rather taken by Lori. She was intelligent, polite, well-spoken, but also unusually private. She didn't make any small talk, didn't have close friends, and in all their conversations, she never shared anything about her past. For Blake, this wasn't necessarily a red flag. He came from a traditional and well-respected family in Texas, and he was drawn to her shy but serious nature. They started dating, and though Blake's family found Lori a little odd, they trusted his judgment. But just as the relationship started, the first signs that something wasn't quite right would start to show themselves. Whenever the topic of Lori's childhood came up, she would shut it down immediately. She never talked about parents, siblings, or an extended family. She refused to talk about where she had grown up. She even gave vague answers about her education. Specifically, not ever naming any of the schools that she attended. Even simple questions, things that normal people would share without hesitation, made her uncomfortable. Blake, wanting to respect her privacy, didn't push, but that didn't mean that his family wouldn't. When they asked Lori about her past, she became defensive, even hostile. It was as if she had built an impenetrable wall between herself and anyone trying to get to know her. But despite their unease, Blake and Lori got married in 2004. The Ruffs, a tight-knit family, welcomed her as best as they could, but deep down, they sensed that something was off. After the wedding, Lori and Blake moved to Leon County, Texas, where they started their new life together. But marriage only seemed to amplify Lori's secrecy. She would isolate herself, rarely speaking to neighbors or even attempting to make friends. She refused to attend family gatherings and, over time, distanced herself completely from Blake's relatives. Even when she got pregnant and gave birth to their child in 2008, her behavior didn't change. And if anything, it only got worse. Lori would never let anyone babysit her child. She kept every document, photo, or personal belonging under lock and key. She even became paranoid, installing multiple locks on doors as if she feared someone was coming for her. Blake's family did all they could to be patient, assuming she had a troubled past, one that she didn't want to discuss. But after 6 years of marriage, Blake couldn't take it anymore. The secrecy, that emotional distance, the paranoia, it all became too much. In 2010, he filed for divorce, and that was something that Lori didn't take well. In December of 2010, just months after Blake filed for divorce, Lori drove to the Ruff family's home in Longview, Texas. She parked in her former in-laws' driveway, sat inside her car, and then took her own life with a single gunshot to the head. The decision to end her life in front of her in-laws' home wasn't random. Many believe that it was her final message, a way to stick it to a family that never really accepted her. But Lori's death would only be the beginning of the mystery. When Blake's family got around to sorting through her belongings, they uncovered some things that I don't think they were expecting to see. In Lori's closet, hidden behind clothes and boxes, Blake's family found a locked strongbox. Inside of it were documents that proved Lori Ruff had been living under a stolen identity for decades. The name that she had met her husband Blake under, Lori Erica Kennedy, wasn't her given name. In fact, there was no record of that person existing before the year 1988. Among the contents of the strongbox, they also found an old Social Security card under the name Becky Sue Turner. They also found a birth certificate with the same name, along with a document that showed Becky Sue Turner legally changed her name to Lori Erica Kennedy in 1988. At first, this seemed like a breakthrough. Maybe the family had uncovered Lori's true name. But when investigators searched for Becky Sue Turner, they found something rather unsettling. The real Becky Sue Turner had died in a house fire in 1971 at the age of 2. Lori had stolen the identity of a dead child in order to create a new life. But that only kicked up the question. If she wasn't originally Becky Sue Turner, then who was she really? The discovery of Lori's false identity led to one of the most baffling investigations into stolen identities in modern history. To her credit, this woman managed to erase her real past completely. She legally changed her name using a dead child's identity, and she lived under a false name for over 20 years without anyone noticing. But despite years of digging, investigators couldn't actually find out who she was. She had left no fingerprints in any databases. She had no medical history before 1988, and she had no family that ever came looking for her. For years, she remained a complete mystery. But then in 2016, nearly 6 years after her death, the enigma of who this woman actually was finally solved. With the help of forensic genealogists as well as DNA testing, investigators were finally able to trace Lori's biological roots. Her real name was Kimberly McLean, and she was originally from Pennsylvania. While I don't mean to disappoint, her story wasn't what many people expected. She wasn't a fugitive. She wasn't running from a crime or an abusive relationship. But instead, at the age of 18, she had simply walked away from her family, cut off all contact, and used this as a springboard to completely recreate herself. Her parents had divorced when she was a teenager, and after a falling out with her mother and her stepfather, she vanished in 1986. She told her family she was leaving and never coming back, and it seems like she meant it. From that moment on, she started a new life, first by stealing the name Becky Sue Turner, then by legally changing it to Lori Erica Kennedy, and later becoming Lori Ruff when she married Blake. For over 2 decades, she lived a double life, and because she carried her secrets to the grave with her, we'll likely never get answers to the questions that we have. The Lori Ruff case stands as one of the strangest identity mysteries out there. The biggest question still remains, why? Why would an 18-year-old girl from a normal, middle-class family go to such extreme lengths to erase her own identity? Why did she never reach out to her real family again? The only person who truly knew the answer to these questions is no longer on this planet. Most people who go missing want to be found, but Lori did the opposite. She made sure no one would ever trace her back to her past. Thanks to science, we now know her name, but we'll never know why she did it. And maybe that's exactly what she wanted. I'm a dog walker for a small but busy company. I have one client in a somewhat nicer neighborhood that I go to twice a week in the mornings. Like most people who use dog walkers, they use a lockbox. They decided to keep theirs behind a vase next to their apartment door. It was already a busy Monday morning for me, and I was in a bit of a rush. I was hoping to get Mia, their Bernedoodle puppy, by 9:45 a.m. so that I could stay on track for the day. After finding parking, which is usually hell in their neighborhood, I made my way up to the apartment door. I wrapped my hand around the vase, intending to grab the lockbox, but I didn't find it. I wasn't alarmed at first. Sometimes owners forget to put out lockboxes. It's not super common, but it does happen. I looked around a bit more, but still had no luck. So I texted the dog's owner. I'll call her Kay for privacy. Usually when I do text her, I get no response since she's so busy. But I text her anyway, asking her where the lockbox could possibly be, since it's not in its usual spot. About 5 minutes passed without a response, and I'm honestly getting a bit irritated. I already have a busy day driving around the entire city, and now I'm going to run behind. So I start knocking. There's a chance that Kay's husband would be home. Sometimes he is. I knock about 3 separate times until I hear some shuffling upstairs. So someone is home. It takes a bit of time, but I hear someone making their way down the stairs. The door swings open, and it's not Kay, nor is it her husband. A man standing in front of me. He's only wearing a white towel that's barely hanging off his hips. He's holding Mia in his arms, and he looks extremely caught off guard. I'm equally caught off guard, and a bit confused, but I'm not quite horrified. Maybe they were having a visitor stay with them, or maybe someone was having an affair. Maybe that's why the lockbox was absent. "Hey, I'm here to take Mia for her walk." He lets her run out into the hallway and hands the leash and collar over, which are always on the staircase railing. I ask him if he could please give me the lockbox to keep outside since I need it to get back inside. He gives it to me. We head out for our walk, and I'm a bit flabbergasted. What did I just walk in on? I ultimately figured it wasn't too much out of the ordinary. Sometimes clients forget to mention they have guests. But then during our walk, I get a message from my manager. "Do you have Mia?" Then she called me. I pick up. I let her know I have Mia and we're on our walk. She says that she got a weird message from Kay that morning. Kay had stated that a man came by earlier saying he was the new dog walker and needed their lockbox code. I guess her husband gave up the code. But we never set up a new walker. I then let my manager know about the man in the towel when I got to the apartment and how the lockbox was gone. Told her I wasn't sure if I had walked in on something or if he was a guest. Well, he wasn't a secret lover or a guest. That man wasn't supposed to be there at all. Police were called immediately. I was told in absolute terms to not go back into the home. I called Kay's husband as he was on his way back over. Kay was en route from work as well. Kay's husband tells me he feels so stupid for telling the man the code, but that he was in a rush out the door and didn't assume anything bad. I continue walking down the street, which was a quite busy, major street in our town, and then I spot a familiar man across the street. He runs across the street towards me, and he's holding a beer in his hand. "Hi, doggy. Hi, doggy," he goes. It was the same man from inside the apartment, and just as quick, he ran back across the street. I immediately turned the other direction onto one of the side streets and called Kay's husband. He was nearing the neighborhood and tells me that he just saw a man matching the description that I gave him. Once Kay and her husband arrived, we went upstairs to scope out the apartment, expecting some items to be missing. Nothing. Everything perfectly in its place and untouched. The only thing different was some dirty water in the shower that had been used. I was happy that nobody was hurt. This includes Mia. I was happy that I wasn't hurt, but how did that guy know that this couple had a dog walker? I guess it's not hard to believe that he could have easily seen me walking the pup around the neighborhood, but that still doesn't tell me how he knew the building where the pup lived, how to get into it, and which unit belonged to the couple. I think that altogether, having someone break into your house just to take a hot shower is the most benign thing that could have happened. Although, it still doesn't do away with the invasion of privacy, the fear, and all the other things that come along with that. It's scary when you think just how easily this could have been an even darker outcome had that intruder had a different set of wants. This story happened to me in Arnold, Missouri. So when I, a 42-year-old female, was 11 years old, I lived in a lower middle-class neighborhood in Missouri, and this all occurred over approximately 6 months or so. I had naively put up posters offering babysitting services with my phone number on them. It was the early 90s, what can I say? I began getting phone calls from a man who identified himself as a doctor. No name, just doctor. Again, I was kind of sheltered and naive, so I just took that at face value. He asked me some pretty basic health questions at first, but a few phone calls in, he would start asking me some rather personal questions. Some examples are if I had hit puberty yet, had I gotten my first period. He asked the same about my older sisters, and then it progressed to him asking me if I would touch myself while on the phone with him. This happened several times. He was adamant that I didn't tell anyone about our calls. After a while, I began feeling uneasy and began lying to him about if I had done what he asked. I think he could tell that I was lying though, and he seemed to be getting frustrated with me. One day he called, and my older sister was standing nearby while I was on the phone. I asked him to hold on and try to get her to act like me just so she could hear what kind of he was saying. She resisted, but I begged and pleaded with her to hop on the phone. When she finally took the receiver, he had hung up. I think it was about a week later. One afternoon, I was walking alone around the neighborhood. This is something that I do regularly in order to pass the time. It was kind of boring in my town, and this was the best I could do. On this day, I was on my street about 12 houses down from mine. I noticed there was a car driving very slowly behind me. All that I remember now is that it was dark-colored and kind of old and beaten up. I didn't want to look very hard or very long, so I didn't see the driver. I got this creepy feeling, so I picked up my pace. The car kept pace with me, never passing and always about 10 feet behind. Inside, I was panicking. I just wanted to get home, so I kept walking faster and faster until I was at a jog. When I finally reached my house's front yard, I ran up to the door. Before opening it, I took a glance back and saw that car pull quickly into the next door neighbor's driveway before turning around and zipping off the way that it came. After that, I never got another phone call and never was followed again, at least to my knowledge. But looking back, I realized that I was probably close to being kidnapped. I don't know why he didn't, but I know that I'm lucky that he didn't try to grab me. I was just a kid, and even putting up the best fight that I could have mustered, I wasn't going to overpower a full-grown man. While I never physically came face to face with the man on the other end of the phone, or that car again, that doesn't mean that it all just evaporated for me. I thought about this situation a lot over the next few years, and even sporadically today. It's one of those situations that, as a kid, you don't know what you're opening yourself up to when you plaster your contact information to a lamppost out in public. I surely didn't know the amount of weirdos and creeps lurking there, and I can only imagine that times haven't changed in that regard. Looking back at old news articles from that time, I came to learn that there were several cases of young girls coming up missing or murdered in and around Arnold. A lot of these cases are still unsolved today. The authorities could never pin down whether they thought it was one or multiple people involved in these disappearances, but I think that I may have been targeted by someone with that same intent. Freaky shit, man. I never told my parents, but I wish I would have. This happened almost 20 years ago somewhere in northern Michigan during the summer. My friend Kathy, 18, my boyfriend's half-sister, May, 16, and I, 17, drove down from our hometown to visit friends, and we're on our way back home in Kathy's shitty little Geo. By shitty, I'm talking this piece of crap had engine problems, overheating problems, ignition problems, and was just constantly falling apart. More than once, it had stalled or just stopped working in the middle of the street while we were trying to get somewhere. But Kathy thought we'd be fine since we hadn't had any problems with it on the way to our friend's house. It's a little past midnight, and we're roughly an hour away from home. There's nobody else on the road, dense woods on every side, no streetlights, no visible moon. I can barely see past the windshield because I have a form of albinism, which leaves me legally blind in my left eye and with really awful vision in my right. My depth perception is terrible, and I can't see more than a few feet ahead of me at most. But usually I can make out lights and other cars when they pass, sometimes even street signs, and people when they're close enough. We drove down this narrow, hilly road, and on the descent down the hill, the Geo makes this strange sound. Kathy starts braking, and when we get to the bottom of the hill, the car just quits working. Kathy swears and turns on the hazard lights. She and I get out of the vehicle, and I help pop the hood, which causes a bunch of smoke to fly out. After the smoke mostly clears, Kathy tries to figure out what went wrong this time. We stand in the dark for at least 45 minutes before we realize that she couldn't fix the car and needed a tow. These were the days of MapQuest printouts and brick phones, so we couldn't whip out any smartphone and look up the closest tow truck. I decided to call my boyfriend, Caleb, to come and pick us up. I also suggest that we come back with a tow to pick up the Geo when the sun's out. May and Kathy both agree, so I take out my Nokia, call my boyfriend. Only to realize I had no service. I asked May and Kathy if either of them had any bars. They both check and shake their heads. May gets a bit panicky, and we all hold our phones up, trying to get signal, but it doesn't work. Even though it's night, it's hot as hell out, and after failing to get any kind of service, we're all feeling a bit spooked and pretty uncomfortable. May begs us to do something because she's more afraid than Kathy and I. Kathy attempts to calm May down, and I wonder if the thick woods and hills are blocking out our reception. I tell May and Kathy to wait by the car, and I walk away from them up the hill that we had just come down, holding my phone out in front of my face. Still no signal. I walk further and further away until I reach the top of the hill. I can't see the outline of the car anymore, but I can still hear May in the distance. Once at the top of the hill, I still can't get a signal. I know it's got to be the trees in the way, so I get the idea of climbing up a tree and calling from there, just to see if it works. In hindsight, this likely wasn't my brightest idea, but me being an idiot, I saunter off into the woods in search of a climbable tree. At this point, I just want to go home, and this is the only thing on my mind. I find a nice one with low branches and lift my body upwards towards the trunk. I climb the branches higher and higher, and about midway up the tree, I feel my pack of smokes fall out of my shorts pocket. I'm kind of annoyed, but I figure I can just look for them when I climb back down. I take my phone out and hold it up once I get near the top. I have service. Relieved, I call Caleb, but he doesn't pick up, so I call again and again until he does. He answers in a sleepy yet audibly pissed voice, but I'm having none of that and explain our situation. He asks where we are. I give him the name of the road and my best guess as to how far along we are on it. He says he'll be on his way and tells me to go back and wait with May and Kathy. Then he yells at me for being stupid enough to climb a tree in the dark with my bad depth perception. I assure him that I'm fine. He's skeptical but says okay, and we hang up. I start climbing down the tree, but my hand touches a big glob of sap. So I stop and try to wipe the sticky goop off on my shirt. I'm already sweaty and gross, so I'm not too happy about the sap. While I'm failing at getting the stuff off my hands, I hear the strangest sound from somewhere below me. It was 3 distinct swish sounds. I completely freeze, not being able to place what the hell that sound was, but it's moving pretty fast. I stare down in the darkness below me, but I can't see anything. I just hear this noise continuing. It comes closer and closer, and then I hear it right below my tree. That same swish. Then it stops. I hold onto the branches as tight as I can and wait. I hear leaves shuffling and twigs snapping, and after a while, that stops. But that weird noise starts up again. It's heading away from me now, deeper into the woods. I wait until I can no longer hear the sound, then finish climbing down and hop out of the tree. It's completely silent now, besides the sounds of the woods, so I grope around on the ground looking for my cigarettes. I don't end up finding them, so I make my way out of the woods and back towards the road. I jog down the hill, and when I reach the bottom, I notice May and Kathy are not standing outside the car anymore, and the hazard lights are now off. I walk over to the car, and May rolls down the window just a little bit, and she whispers in a panicked voice, "Elizabeth, where the hell were you?" I point back over my shoulder towards the hill and started to explain that I had called her brother. But Kathy yelled, "What are you doing? Get the back in the car." I give them a weird look, but May unlocks and opens the door, and I crawl into the back seat with her, slamming the door behind me. Kathy locks the door, and May rolls up the window, making sure that the rest are rolled up too. One of the windows in the Geo has never closed all the way, but there's less than a finger's worth of space, so it's not too big of a deal. But May is freaking out about it, and Kathy has lost all of her cool as well. I'm still confused and asked, "What's going on?" May tells me that a bit after I went up the hill, some weird person came out of the woods and ran really funny up the hill in the direction that I went. Freaked the girls out, so they shut the lights off and got back in the car. They thought that whoever that was had got me, and now I'm honestly scared at this point, because if I hadn't stopped to wipe sap off my hands, I most likely would have gotten out of the tree at the same time I heard that weird noise. I just knew it was that person. I tell them my story, and everybody in the car is scared shitless, but they're relieved that Caleb's on his way. We only have to play the waiting game now. We sit on the road for what seems like forever. That dread that we were feeling made time seem like it was going slower than normal. Kathy and May are constantly looking out the windows, surveying the area, while I just sit there hoping Caleb will hurry the f*** up and come to rescue us. Suddenly, I hear May whine, "Oh my God," and she starts crying. Kathy snaps her head to where May is looking and stifles a gasp of her own. I look off in the direction they're facing, but I see nothing but the dark. That's when I hear it through the small opening in the window. That same swishing sound. May ducks down, as though doing that will make her invisible, and Kathy hides her head behind the steering wheel. I follow their lead and sort of hunch down in my seat, but the noise comes straight up to the window. I can almost make out the silhouette of a tall, skinny man. That's when he presses his face against May's window, and I finally get a good look at him. Nobody screams. You'd think we would, but it didn't happen. We all just stared at each other. He looks in at us for a while until Kathy switches her brights on, hoping that this would scare him off. But it didn't do a thing. At this point, the dude just walked out to the front of the car and stood in front of the headlights. Maybe he thought he could block us from leaving, I don't really know, actually. I couldn't make out his features very well, but the guy had to have been somewhere a bit over 6 feet, and no older than 30. He had the face of your average Joe. Nothing special. Nothing really sinister or particularly creepy that you'd notice about him if you ran into this dude in broad daylight. Dark shaved hair, pale skin, long face. May said he had light-colored eyes and stubble with eyebrows that made him look like he was always concerned. But there was no way that I could make that out, so I had to take her word for it. What was really weird was it was like 80 degrees out, and this dude was wearing corduroys, which, as I think about it, that must have been what made that sound that I heard in the woods. He's also wearing an oversized sweater with abnormally long sleeves. The sleeves went over his hands and flopped back and forth as he paced around in front of the Geo. Not really sure how long he was in front of the car for, but it was a while. Then good old Corduroy starts doing something really bizarre. He bends his arms up towards his face, which I can only describe as looking like a praying mantis because of the way his sleeves were hanging. And then he begins walking circles around the car, rhythmically taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, like goddamn Willy Wonka, but on speed or something. What's really getting to me is the reemergence of that swish sound, the same one that I had heard back in the tree. He was doing the 2 steps forward, 1 step back in the fucking woods when he was going after me, as though this whole thing wasn't weird enough. By now, May was full on sobbing, and Kathy seemed like she had to vomit, so I felt like I had to be the brave one. I looked at the slight space in the open window, and when he orbited his way over there, I said, "Hey man, can you just stop? You're really freaking us out." Corduroy definitely heard me, so he switched to a halt and looked back into the car through the windshield, straight at me. I asked him very firmly to leave, and he took an extended pause, smiled, then Willy Wonka'd his way out of my line of vision and off into the darkness. After a while, Kathy said he disappeared into the woods, and May was like, "I can't believe that worked." We awkwardly laughed about what a weirdo he was, and how glad we were that he left. That's when we went back to waiting for Caleb, somewhat reassured but still paranoid. But after about 5 minutes of silence, Kathy said, "Oh no, he's back." I couldn't see him, but apparently he was doing the 2 steps forward, 1 step back parallel to us on the side of the road. And this time he had a big tree branch he was holding with his sweater-covered hands. May got scared again, and I held her hand so she'd feel just a little bit better about it, even though I was ready to shit myself too. It was awful because I didn't know if he was coming towards us or if he was moving away, or really what the hell he was up to. It was kind of like when you knew there was going to be a jump scare in a horror movie. Then I heard Corduroy swish his way back to the Geo and onto my window. He smacks it with the tree branch. May and I panic, and I scoot as close to her as possible. They see the dude back up into the woods, then come running back and slamming the branch back into my window. It's like he's jousting, but with no horse. Thankfully, the window didn't break. But it was terrifying hearing all of his swishes, followed by a clonk after a while. He did this 5 or 6 times. Kathy perks up in her seat and starts pointing at the road ahead. I see headlights. She blares the horn and flashes her lights. And lo and behold, it's our savior, Caleb. He brought his older brother, Alex, and they both get out of his car and head over to us. May's sobs turn into joyous laughter as her brothers approach. Now, Caleb and Alex have always been tall guys. Walking around with them was like walking around with high elves. It felt very safe. Caleb was 6'8", Alex around 6'5". So I thought 2 dudes taller than Corduroy Jouster would make him leave. But that wasn't the case. Caleb walks straight towards the guy, trying to assess the situation. And Alex comes over to the car and taps on the window, tells Kathy to get out. She does, and he walks her over to his car. Then he comes back and puts the car in neutral so we can push it off to the side of the road. May and I slowly get out, and May makes a beeline for her brother's car. I help Alex push the car to the side while Caleb distracts the Corduroy Jouster by holding the end of his stick and telling him to all the way off. Corduroy yanks the branch away from Caleb and starts backing up by going 2 steps backward, 1 step forward, and then disappears in the darkness down the street. I can't see him, but Caleb can. The dude backs up pretty far and then comes hurtling at Caleb, who sprints the other way down the road, because that stick would have really hurt him. He bumps past Alex, who had already gotten out of the Geo and was opening his car door, leaving me behind the Geo alone. Corduroy apparently changed directions and aimed the stick right at me, but I couldn't tell. I just hear everybody shout, "Elizabeth!" This startles me, and I jump to the side of the Geo, hearing Corduroy smash his stick into the back window with a loud thud, as well as that swish. I take the long way around the car and sprint off into the road before I feel Caleb grab my arm and tug me over to Alex's car. I feel like the wind's been knocked out of me and my legs don't seem to work, but Caleb manages to shove me in the back seat before scrambling into the passenger seat himself. By now, we're all safely inside the car, and Corduroy is standing like a mantis in front of the headlights again. He had abandoned his stick by now, and he just stood there with no clear intention to move. Alex puts the car into reverse and slams on the gas, making me knock my head against the door, then makes the sloppiest U-turn ever and nearly drives us off into the woods, but he's able to get back onto the road. Everybody was in 100% what the f*** mode as Alex tore off, far over whatever the speed limit was. May and Kathy swear they saw Corduroy chasing behind us after Alex made the U-turn, but there was no way he was catching up to a moving car. The next day, I went back there with Caleb, Kathy, and the dude from the tow truck place. There was no sign of Corduroy anymore, but when we approached the Geo, we saw that in the space where the window didn't quite close all the way were my cigarettes. The box was missing, but a string of about 12 Lucy's were all neatly jammed in a row along the window space. I have no doubt that it was the work of the Corduroy jouster. To this day, I wonder if he knew I was up the tree and took my cigarettes, or if he thought I dropped them and went further into the woods to look for me, or if he just found them later and decided to stick them through the window, because he was fucking weird like that. I also still wonder what the hell he was doing in the first place. There are still so many unanswered questions that I have. Kathy eventually got a new car that summer, after she told her dad what had happened. May wanted to go to the police, but we didn't know what we'd even tell them. Some weirdo was smacking a stick on our car at night and put cigarettes in the window? The cops probably wouldn't believe a bunch of young people. They'd most likely assume we were on drugs or something. I was recently talking to Alex and May about this incident, and Alex urged me to write this out. May told me to shut up because she hates talking about this. If anyone out there hearing this is considering visiting the woods of northern Michigan, I'd encourage you to reevaluate your plans. There's no telling if Corduroy is still out there, still doing weird stuff to people he comes across in the road. I'm a 34-year-old single guy now, but years ago, I found myself in a relationship that was slowly dragging me down a terrible path. It started off fine, the way most things do, but over time, it became clear that it wasn't just unhealthy, it was abusive. The kind of situation where, if I stayed, I knew I'd eventually lose myself completely. So one night, I decided that I had had enough. I packed up my stuff, grabbed my cat Onyx, and moved halfway across the country. No plan, no idea of what came next, just the overwhelming need to get out. The apartment that I found wasn't great. It was small, kind of run down, and in a neighborhood that wasn't exactly the safest. But it was cheap, and at that point, I wasn't looking for luxury. I just needed a fresh start. For the first few weeks, I felt like I was finally breathing again. It was just me and Onyx, settling into this new space, doing our best to adjust. She was my one constant, always there waiting for me at the door when I got home, curling up on my lap, and purring like she knew that I needed the comfort. But one night, she just disappeared. I had just gotten back from grabbing some groceries. I remember that it wasn't too late, maybe 7 or 8 p.m. and the walk from my complex entrance up to my front door was quiet. I unlocked it, expecting Onyx to be there like always, but she wasn't. At first, I figured maybe she was napping in some weird new hiding spot. She always had this habit of squeezing herself into the most random of places. But as I put my bags down and called for her, she never came around the corner. I started checking under the bed, in the closets, behind the couch. Nothing. And that's when a sinking feeling hit me. I remembered closing and locking my door when I left. The windows were all locked, and there was no way for her to have gotten out. But she wasn't in the apartment. For the next week, I was an absolute mess. I walked around the neighborhood, calling her name, hoping that I'd hear that familiar little meow. I put up missing cat posters everywhere, on street lamps, bus stops, even in the windows of nearby stores. People were sympathetic, but no one had seen her. And by the 7th day, I was just about out of hope. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at that empty space on my couch where she would always be curled up. And I felt like I had failed her. She had been with me through everything, all of the worst parts of my life. And now in this new place, the one thing that I still had from my old life, the one thing that I actually cared about, was now gone. That hole made it hard to sleep that night. The next morning, I went out for my usual walk, not exactly to look for Onyx, but just to clear my head. I was gone from my place for maybe an hour. But when I returned and I'm walking down the hallway up to my door, I could see that something was off. My door was slightly opened. I stopped because I knew without a doubt that I had locked it before I left. I always did. And for a few seconds, I just stood there, heart slamming against my ribs. It was obvious that someone had been in my apartment, but I didn't know if they were still inside or if they had already come and gone. As I peeked through the crack in the door, that's when I saw her, Onyx. She was lying on the couch, curled up in her spot like she had never left. I let out this huge sigh of relief and practically ran inside, scooping her up and holding her tight. She purred against my chest like nothing had happened, like she had been at home the entire time. But something had happened, and that's when it settled down over me. That person who had been in my apartment, they had had a key. The joy of having my cat back quickly turned to fear. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and called the police. While waiting for them to get there, I called my landlord, Jim. And by the time the cops arrived, I was struggling to keep it together. I explained everything. My missing cat, how I had searched for the entire week, how she had suddenly reappeared inside of my locked apartment. As one of the officers looked around, he asked, "Are there any signs of forced entry?" There weren't any, and that's when my landlord dropped this bomb on me. He had never gotten around to changing the locks after the last tenant moved out. Jim looked uncomfortable as he admitted it. This is something that landlords have to do when people move out, but it seems like he just forgot. One of the cops asked, "Is it possible that the previous tenant still has a key?" Jim shook his head. He didn't think so. My place had sat empty for a year, and the last tenant was a single mother who had broken her lease early to go get a better job out of state. That kind of left only one possibility. If the last tenant didn't have a key, well, someone else did. Someone who knew the apartment had been vacant. Someone who'd know how to get in and out without leaving a trace. Someone who had taken my cat, only to bring her back a week later. The police took a report, but with no forced entry and no cameras in the building along with no real evidence, there wasn't much they could do. And knowing that someone had been in my home, I wasn't going to stick around to find out why they were there. I called my parents that evening, asked them for a little help because I was going to leave this place. Within a week, I had packed up everything and moved out. Jim offered to change the locks, but at that point, it didn't matter to me. I was never going to be comfortable there anymore, so I wasn't staying. This all happened years ago, and I've moved several times between then and now. But now, the first thing I do before I step foot inside of my new place is to confirm that the locks were changed. No exceptions. I still don't know who had my key. I don't know why they took Onyx or why they brought her back. Maybe it was just some sick game. That is, until their conscience caught up with them. I personally believe that someone had likely been using the vacant apartment to crash at before I moved in. Given that all of this unfolded within a few weeks of me landing at this place, I'm guessing that they didn't know someone had moved in until they stopped by and found it full of stuff and my companion. None of my other possessions were touched. Nothing else was missing. So the fact that they took off with my cat was absolutely purposeful. While I'm happy to have never met the person that did this, I'm still glad that they decided to bring her back. Onyx is still with me today. She's almost 13 years old now and beginning to slow down. But there have been plenty of times over the years where I've looked at her and wished she could speak. I'd only want to know one thing if she could. Where were you during that week? Maybe I'm overreacting, but something happened today that I want to share and gather thoughts on. A friend of mine forwarded me a Craigslist ad for some dolls with a decent amount of extras. I collect dolls, if you couldn't tell from that first sentence. This post was up for $50, an exceptionally good price, especially for all the things that were coming with it. I emailed and got no response, so I thought, oh well, someone must have beat me to it. But at 9:45 p.m., I got an email reply saying, "Sorry, I've been out all day. When can you pick up?" I responded, "I can pick up tomorrow. What time and where?" I got no immediate response, so I just went to bed. The next morning, I was still dragging due to the time change, so I didn't check my email until around 10 a.m. There was an email from the person saying, "I waited at the chapel school for 10 minutes. You're not here, so I'm leaving." This message was sent from an iPhone. I write back that I'm very sorry. I didn't get any emails last night before going to bed, and I just got up myself. I didn't know I had an appointment, but I'd be happy to come by your home if that's convenient for you. It's about a 30-minute drive for me. This person emails back that it's fine, that she can meet me in an hour at the school. I Googled it to find that there are 2 chapel schools in that town, so I emailed back asking which one it was. The only reply was deafening silence. Since I already stood her up once and potentially missed this fantastic deal, I was going. So I jumped in my car and emailed again saying which school I picked of the 2 listed, and that I was on my way. I get there, and it's the weekend, so the school's closed. I never got any return email specifying which school it exactly was, so I just hoped that I had picked the right one. Within 5 minutes of me landing, a black SUV pulls up next to me with this pleasant-looking couple in their late 30s, as well as 2 large dogs in the back seat. The guy of the couple is driving, and he stays in the driver's seat. The woman who was sitting passenger gets out holding a large closed box. She says I can look through it if I want, as I hand her a $50 bill. The woman was still talking, and we're standing right at the front fender of her SUV. I see out of the corner of my eye the guy get out of his seat and walk to the back of the vehicle. At first, I thought he was maybe checking up on the dogs from the back hatch. But no. He walks around the rear of the car, around my car, and comes up behind me almost in my blind spot. I turn to look at him with this startled look because it's just so odd how he's approaching me. He's got this blank-looking half smile on his face, hands in his pockets, and he's not making eye contact. As he's standing at my front bumper, I feel my skin start to crawl. Got a deep knot in the pit of my stomach, and I became acutely aware of there not being another soul anywhere around. There was no reason for him to have gotten out of the car in the first place. The transaction was over. But now they had effectively trapped me between 2 vehicles. Doing my best to think quickly, I knew that I didn't want to walk by either one of them. But with the guy no longer in the driver's seat of his car, that left me a clear path to walk between the 2 vehicles, go around the back of mine, and plop right into the driver's seat. I wouldn't have to get within arm's length of either of them, and I could keep my eyes on them as I moved. I didn't say another word to them, and the moment my butt hit that seat, I slammed the door and locked it. All the while, not breaking eye contact with either of them. This was so strange to me because if his intent had been to keep his wife safe during the transaction, why did he wait until the money had been exchanged to get out of the car? And why go the long way around the whole car to come up behind me, when the shortest distance to his wife was right around the front that we were closest to? This only caused more questions in my mind. Who goes to the trouble of loading 2 big dogs in an SUV for a 3-minute ride? It appeared they lived close by since she was so willing to make a second appointment when I didn't show up to the first. I think the dogs were meant to be a distraction, and it honestly leaves me wondering if this was a dry run for a kidnapping, and they got cold feet when they saw that I wouldn't be an easy target. Whatever was behind this, it was seriously creepy, and I'm not the type of person who sees danger around every tree, but there was just something off about this whole interaction. I imagine that no one here is unaware of just how odd Craigslist interactions can be in person, but even saying this can be a reminder that some folks may need, myself included. Stranger danger isn't just a thing for kids, and there are certain situations in life that put that fact right in front of your face. I'm heading out on a camping trip soon, and for some reason, this memory popped back into my head. It's one of those things that I didn't think was weird at the time, but now as an adult, I realized just how creepy it actually was. When I was about 10 or 11, my dad used to take me fishing and hiking almost every weekend. It was his way of helping me cope with some tough stuff that had happened back then. It was always just the two of us, windows down, music blasting, heading up the mountain. I still remember the exact drive that day. We parked by the lake, unpacked our things, and got set up. Fishing was fun, but I didn't have the patience for it back then, so after about 10 minutes of nothing happening, I asked if I could go look for tadpoles along the shore. Dad said yes, as long as I stayed close. So there I was, this little blonde kid in a bathing suit, walking along the water's edge, completely in my own world, just staring off at the water. Even that young, I hate to say it, but I had already learned that some adults saw me differently than they should have. I had been made aware, in ways no kid should, that not everyone looks at you with your best interests at heart. That's probably why I was already wary of older strangers. But unfortunately, I was also still a dumb kid. I wasn't really paying attention to my surroundings when I heard someone say, "Hey." I looked up and saw a group of guys sitting on a big rock about 20 feet out into the lake. There were 3 or 4 of them on the rock, another 3 or 4 in the water, maybe more. I couldn't see all the way around the formation, so there could have been others that I didn't notice. They looked about the same age as my older brothers, which I think is why I wasn't concerned. They weren't old men by any stretch, and they weren't acting threatening, just regular teens, maybe 17 or 18. I said hi back and then immediately went back to what actually mattered, the tadpoles. But these guys kept talking to me. I don't remember the entire conversation, but I do remember one specific question. "What kind of dog do you like?" I didn't think twice about it. I just answered, "Huskies." And that's when they said something that at the time seemed completely harmless. "Oh wow, we actually have a husky at our cabin. Want to come meet it?" Now, I didn't get weird vibes from them. I didn't think they were up to something. I just knew that I had to ask my dad first. So I said, "Yeah, let me go ask my dad," and quickly walked away. Once again, not because I felt scared, not because I sensed that something was off, just because I was a kid who had been taught to always ask before wandering off. I went back to my dad and, in the most casual way possible, said something along the lines of, "Hey Dad, I met some guys about brother's age, and they said I can meet their husky. Can I go?" My dad, just like the normal adult he is, immediately says, No." And just like that, I was annoyed. But this is also the same dad who once walked straight through a glass door out of panic because he thought I was missing, when I had actually just fallen asleep in a closet. And the same guy who had stood between me and a bear without hesitation. He was overprotective and at the time, I just thought he was being his usual, over-the-top self. He asked me some follow-up questions, but I wasn't really paying attention to how serious he had suddenly become. I just figured he wanted to know who these guys were and where I had met them. That's when he said, "Show me." Still not realizing this was a big deal, I walked him back to the spot where I had talked to them. But all those guys were gone. At first, I was just confused. I figured maybe they had just left to go do something else. But my dad? Well, he was pissed. The fact they were nowhere to be seen was a huge red flag for him. If they really just wanted to show me their dog, then why'd they leave so fast? He didn't say much after that, just told me that I had to stay near him for the rest of the day. I was frustrated, but I listened. Years passed before I truly thought about what almost happened that day. It wasn't until I got much older that it hit me. They had zero hesitation when I walked away. They didn't call out after me or say, "Oh yeah, best to go ask your dad." They just took off. Because they weren't really trying to show me a dog. They were trying to lure me away. I'm 28 now, and I still get a chill thinking about that moment. At the time, I thought it was just some weird interaction. But now, I realize how bad it could have been if I had been the kind of kid who didn't bother to ask for permission. Maybe nothing would have happened. Maybe they actually did have a husky at their cabin. But if that was the case, why'd they disappear the second that I mentioned asking my dad? I don't have an answer for that. And honestly, I'm content with thinking that I dodged a major bullet when I walked off back towards my parent. I don't have kids of my own yet. I don't have any little ones to take camping. But when I do, any excursion to go find tadpoles by the shore will most definitely be a group activity. No wandering off on my watch. When I was in my mid-20s, I joined the Army. Like anyone who's gone through basic training knows, it's a pretty intense experience. Physically, mentally, and socially. You're thrown into a unit with people from every background imaginable. Different races, religions, different personalities, and different life experiences. The training is meant to break you down and build you back up, and it's through the shared misery that you bond with people you wouldn't normally come into contact with. That's how I met Thad. It was the first week of our training, and funny enough, we had little to nothing in common. He was from the Southwest, I was from New England, and the only reason we got close was that our unit assigned bunks alphabetically, which put us right next to each other. That meant that he was the last person I saw before lights out, the first person I saw at wake up, and the guy I ended up getting smoked next to every time the drill sergeants had us doing push-ups. We spent a lot of time cleaning weapons, talking, and just killing time together. But there was always something a little weird about him. For starters, he'd ask odd questions. Stuff like, "Are you really willing to die for this country?" Because I wouldn't. I'd go AWOL for my family first. He had zero hesitation in telling me that the only reason he joined the Army was to get out of town. Turns out before enlisting, he was heavily into meth, both cooking and smoking it. I had nothing to contribute to that conversation since where I was from, I didn't know much about the meth scene, and I didn't do drugs anyway. Thad also had this nasty habit of sneaking in contraband. Tobacco, porn, instant coffee. Thad would have someone on the outside get the goods in through the mail. They would glue letters together with the bootlegged items between them, place the letters into the envelope like everything was normal. And so long as the package didn't feel too thick to be on the level, it would make it past our mail checks. To me, it seemed like a rather ridiculous risk, but he loved bragging about how he got away with it. And then there was the fight. Technically, it started as wrestling between him and another recruit, but that didn't last long. They went from messing around to throwing real blows in the matter of a few moments, and it ended up taking a bunch of us other recruits to break it up. That wasn't normal sparring, and looking back, it never really seemed like just roughhousing gone too far. But despite all that weirdness, there was one normal topic that Dad just wouldn't shut up about. His wife. Every chance he got, he'd go on about how much he missed her, how amazing she was, how she was the only one for him. He'd tell all these detailed stories about their life together, how much he loved her, and how he couldn't wait to see her again. At the time, I absolutely empathized with him. Basic training is brutal, and everyone missed their loved ones. So that one series of thoughts from him didn't seem irrational to me. We ended up graduating together, but we went our separate ways and moved on to our next assignments. Dad and I ended up on the same base, but in different units, so every now and then, when I would see him, I'd say what's up and try to strike up some form of conversation. But he'd act like he didn't recognize me. Or he'd talk about things that never happened. Like we had completely different memories of basic training that we shared together. At first, I thought maybe he was just being some weird asshole. But looking back, it was far weirder than that. So fast forward 3 years. I was scrolling through Facebook one night when I saw a news article shared by another guy from Basic. It was Thad's mugshot. The headline that accompanied it, something along the lines of, "Ex-soldier arrested for murder and arson." I clicked the article and started reading. Turns out Thad had been kicked out of the army, and soon after he had returned home, just to murder his ex-wife's new boyfriend before burning the guy's house down. After reading the entire piece, I learned that Thad's wife had separated from him years ago. Years before he'd ever entered the army, before we met at Basic. She had a new boyfriend right before or not long after he joined, though. In other words, he was in complete denial about his wife leaving him. According to the story, Thad had left notes talking about murder and dying taped to his ex-wife's door when he got back from the service. He obviously was so crazy that he had no concern about getting caught for murder, based on all the incriminating stuff that he did prior to the fact. I firmly believe that, because if he had attempted to flee or hide, he didn't do a very good job at it. He was arrested within a day of committing his crimes. So all the stuff that he talked about when we were chowing or cleaning, about how he missed his wife, those were just delusions. And the way he said that he couldn't wait to see her has taken on an even creepier light. At that point, she was long done with him and wanted nothing further to do with this person. I ended up keeping an eye on the story to see what his sentencing was, and it was described as essentially life in prison, a hard 50. The thing that still makes me shake my head at night is that I spent 3 months every day next to that kid, basically night and day, and I had no clue what he was truly capable of. For anybody interested, I left a link to a news story that OP provided in the description down below. The article itself is from 2015, just after the capture of Thad Christopher Green, who at the time was accused of killing 35-year-old Cameron Wozniak. In 2017, Green was found guilty of first-degree murder, arson, and aggravated burglary. He's currently serving a sentence of life without the eligibility of parole for 50 years within the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. I, a female and 22 at the time, worked at a popular theme park for several years while also going to college and working 2 other jobs. I seemed to get sick a lot during this period of my life. In hindsight, I now realize that it was likely due to not sleeping much, not eating well, and not drinking enough water, along with being exposed to hundreds of people and their germs on a daily basis. One busy weekend, I picked up a late shift to make a little extra holiday pay. I'd been assigned to an area with a lot of guest flow, and the 3 or 4 of us running the spot were getting overwhelmed rather quickly. At some point, while trying to tell a guest that he couldn't stay where he had parked his family, a walkway, the guest started to get confrontational. Now, I had been assaulted by park-goers before while working, so I completely locked up. This guest was in my face, screaming about how I was ruining his vacation, when I saw a shadow appear from behind me. A large man in a similar uniform to mine was standing behind me, staring down this belligerent guest. Behind him was another large guy, same uniform, telling the guest that he needed to move on or they'd call security. I was relieved. The guest left, and the two men stayed near me for the rest of the evening to make sure that I wasn't bothered again. The second coworker, a man that I'll call Mac, asked me all kind of questions about my life and where it was in the park that I usually worked. I was so grateful for their support, I think I answered his questions for the next 2 or 3 hours while we finished up our shifts. At the end of the evening, Mac asked for my phone number, and I gave it to him. It wasn't really my type, but I figured it was the least I could do after how much he and his friend had helped me out that night. We ended up going on a date about a week later. It wasn't a very long one, and I realized pretty early on that I still really wasn't interested in him as anything more than a friend. When we went to part ways, Mac asked when he could see me again. I tried to gently turn him down as nicely as I could, telling him I would be up for being friends, but nothing else. He protested, begged for one more date, and I could tell that he was actually pretty angry behind it. I shook my head again, apologizing profusely, not wanting to be rude. But his face was now flushed with anger, and he forced a too long hug on me before I could walk away. It was a big theme park that I worked at, and we didn't normally work in the same area, so I left feeling some relief at knowing that I probably wouldn't see him again. My phone started going off constantly around this point, though. Text after text, paragraphs asking for another chance, telling me that we were, quote, meant to be, and that our meeting had been fate. He really did think that he was my knight in shining armor, and couldn't seem to understand why I wasn't interested. After countless messages back telling him I really didn't see him that way, I finally went on to block his number. About a week later, one of my zone coworkers came up to me asking if I was dating a manager in another area. Mac had evidently been telling people that he and I were going steady. I vehemently denied it to my coworker, and to several others that came up to me throughout the day. A few days later, I saw Mac waiting near the entrance of the payroll office, seemingly looking for someone. Before I could think to avoid him, he spotted me and ran up to say hello. I remember his eyes being just a little too wide, his smile being mildly off-putting. He repeatedly said how much he had enjoyed our date, that he couldn't wait for the next one. There were lots of people walking around nearby, so I mumbled that I still wanted to just be friends. Then I pretended that someone walking by was my roommate. I told Mac I had to go so I could get a ride home. His face once again contorted with anger, and that's when he tried to grab my arm, saying he would give me a lift home. But I dodged that. Before he could try again, I had slipped into the crowd. I remember feeling my heart banging off the walls of my chest, and I kept checking behind myself the entire walk to the lot. He just stood outside of the payroll office, face still visibly red, staring at me as I walked away. A few days later, I was sick yet again. I got on antibiotics, but my body had, unknown to me, developed an immunity to that brand of medication. I kept taking those pills for a week, not understanding why I was just feeling worse. My roommate finally came home from work one afternoon to find me literally gasping for air in my bed. She rushed me off to the ER, where they admitted me for a high fever and pneumonia. That first night, after being admitted, one of my lungs collapsed, and the hospital told me that I was going to be there for a while. My roommate had only told a few of our close friends that I was in the hospital. They visited when they could, bringing me books to read and keeping me updated on work. One told me that a manager from another zone in the park had been stopping by almost daily to see if I was there. I felt my blood run cold, and my heart rate ticked up on the monitor by my bed. I didn't have to think too long about who that manager was. I tried to sleep while I could after they left, but between the machines, the nurses checking in every hour, and worrying about Max seeking me out, I could only manage a few hazy naps. The next day, I was woken up from one of these sporadic naps by a knock at my door. Expecting to see a nurse, I tried to sit up completely but just didn't have the energy. Through sleepy, blurred vision, I saw a large man enter the room. It was Mac. I felt my heart start pounding again. He was carrying flowers and had that same creepy smile on his face. I was stuck. I couldn't move to get away, and there was no one else around. The nurse call button on my bedside was broken. The nurse had already warned me about it, saying that they would just be monitoring my vitals from the nurse's station until it could be fixed. I could not believe that he was there, How did he even find out that I was here? He came and sat next to the bed, grabbing my hand in a too tight grip. He told me that he was worried after not seeing me at work anymore, that he wanted to check in on his girl. The heart rate monitor was beeping pretty steadily now, and must have triggered something at the nurse's station. I still couldn't breathe very well. Long-winded speeches were hard, and I was internally freaking the out. So I was just replying to his chattering and questions with quiet, single-syllable words. After what felt like an eternity, but what was likely no more than a few minutes, a nurse walked in. Mac's grip on my hand grew even tighter, prompting something akin to a squeak from me as my hand felt crushed inside of his. The nurse must have seen the look on my face, which I'm grateful for. And after a split-second glance between Mac and I, she asked him to step out so she could check me over. He dropped the flowers on the table and grudgingly walked out of the room. Before the door shut, he looked back at me and said he'd come back as soon as she was done. Once the door closed, the nurse asked if I was okay. I shook my head no. She asked if I wanted him to come back. I managed a raspy, not at all. She didn't pry, didn't ask, but told me that she would take care of it. Grabbing a quarantine sign out of a cabinet near the entrance to my room, she hung it on the outside of the door. I heard him later arguing with her for 5 to 10 minutes before it finally got quiet again. She'd tell me afterwards that he had finally left, and that she made a note at the nurse's station to not let him in again. I thanked her and asked if she could throw the flowers away outside the room. Just looking at them was giving me the shakes. I was there for another 2 weeks. They didn't want to release me too early, given my medical history. I asked my roommate to pick up a gift card the day before I left, so I could give it to the nurse who had been so kind and perceptive during my stay. I didn't return to work for another 2 to 3 weeks after that. My lung capacity took another month to fully be back to what it was before. When I got back, I asked the couple of friends of mine if they had told Mac that I was hospitalized and which facility I was in. There were several large medical centers in the area. I didn't think he could have found out by calling every single department. They said they had only told our head manager that I was there when she had asked why I had been gone for so long. I can now safely assume that he found out from her. I spent the next several months looking over my shoulder and scanning rooms before entering them. I thought I spotted him sitting in his car in our lot a few times, but I was never 100% sure. I made sure that I was never alone going out to my car in the evenings. I eventually found out that he'd been force transferred to another park for reasons no one was told. I hadn't said anything to HR, so my best guess is that it was something other than his apparent interest in me. But that I'm just left to wonder about because I'd never see Mac again. Something that I'm absolutely over the moon to get to say. When I was 19, I worked for a company that allocated labor to rural areas of Australia. Basically, what you did was tell them when you were available, and they'd send you to a remote farm for a few weeks where you do whatever they needed done. It was hard work and long hours, but good pay and good fun if you got in with a nice group of workers. When this occurred, I was working on a large property. I was told that it covered roughly the same landmass as the state of Maryland, and it was about 9 hours away from Sydney. The property itself was about 40 minutes from the nearest town. In short, it was the middle of nowhere. I was working at the farm clearing bushland with 3 other guys my age from the city. Our boss was a guy called Jeremy who owned the farm and supervised us while helping out with the work. He was a pretty laid-back guy and was generally really nice to us. This summer in particular was very hot and the work was hard, so one day when the temperature hit about 38 degrees Celsius, about 100 Fahrenheit, Jeremy decided to give us the afternoon off. He said he knew of a water hole on the farm about a 25-minute drive north. I was keen for a swim, but the other guys just wanted to relax. So Jeremy and I hopped into one of the work trucks and started heading across the property. It was mostly wide, empty expanses with a few clumps of scattered bushland. Jeremy wasn't much of a talker, so we drove more or less in silence. After about 20 minutes, though, he suddenly perked up and jabbed me in the ribs. Do you see that over there? Beneath the 2 dead trees. I should mention here that if you're not familiar with inland areas, particularly those in Australia, they are brown or red and mostly flat and bland, meaning any bright colors stick out like a sore thumb. So you can imagine our surprise when we could see a large blue angular structure far off in the distance. Jeremy steered in its direction, and as we got closer we realized it was a huge blue shipping container just sitting out there in the middle of nowhere. Jeremy was perplexed. I asked him if he knew what it was, but he obviously didn't. He said that he hadn't seen it when he drove through the same area about 5 weeks before, and he wanted to go see what it was. Initially, we pulled to a stop about 100 meters away from it. At this stage, I had a really bad feeling. The whole thing just wasn't right, and that's hard to explain, but if you can imagine seeing such a foreign object in the middle of a huge barren expanse, it's going to be something weird. Jeremy, however, wanted to investigate, which I can understand, given it was his property, but in truth, I was actually really anxious. As we got closer, things only got more bizarre. There was a big diesel generator behind it, thumping away, and a CCTV camera on each side of it, all motion activated so they buzzed from side to side, following us around as we moved. I tried to reason with Jeremy, something along the lines of, with all this security, someone obviously doesn't want us here. Let's just go. He brushed me off though, reminding me that it was his farm, and whoever had put this here was trespassing, so he wanted to go inside of it. Despite all the surveillance, there was only a small padlock on this huge door. We had some bolt cutters in the toolbox, and after a bit of a struggle, we broke the lock and went inside. The first thing I noticed was the rush of cold air as we got in. The place was air-conditioned, which I must admit was quite pleasant. We searched around for a light switch, but I could already see that this was some sort of IT setup. There were flashing LEDs all around the place, and the sort of hum that you only hear when a hard drive is working hard. When we finally switched on the lights, we could see a sophisticated, albeit somewhat cluttered, office setup. There were hard drives the size of bar fridges and other computer equipment lining the walls, sometimes piled 2 or 3 high, and plastic storage boxes scattered around the far wall. There were even several desks with computer monitors arranged in the middle, complete with rolling office chairs. At this stage, I felt like I was in one of those nonsensical dreams, being that there was absolutely no logic to this discovery. We wandered to the middle and sat down at the desk to see if the computers could give us any idea of what the hell was going on here. Both my heart and my mind were racing, and I just wanted to bolt. We had been seen by the CCTV, so if anyone was monitoring, they'd already know we were here. Jeremy, on the other hand, was adamant that we get to the bottom of this, so I put on my best brave face and started looking through the computer. This went on for a while, but in short, neither of us had a very high grasp of technology outside of Facebook or Microsoft Word. The best I can describe it from my lay position is that it was endless lists of computer talk. It was like what the old Napster or LimeWire download screens look like, just constantly picking up and receiving data, then recording it on several windows. I gave up on the computers and walked cautiously over to the far end of the container to the big pile of storage boxes. By then, I was pretty sure there was no one else here, given that there was nowhere to hide really, but I was still incredibly on edge. I decided, against my better judgment, to see what was inside of all these boxes. My brief sift through this box still makes me feel sick to my stomach. It didn't take long for me to realize that this box was full of posters, DVDs, and photos, all of hardcore CP. One thing that still gets to me is that it was all neatly ordered into folders and small boxes. These people were organized. I immediately recoiled, jumped up, and ran over to Jeremy. I could hardly string a sentence together, but I said something to the effect of, "Mate, get out." I dragged him out of the container, did my best to compose myself, and I managed to explain what it was that I saw. We jumped back into the truck and sped back to the house. The farm had no cell reception, and we hadn't brought the satellite phone, so we had to get back to the landline in order to call the police. Once we called them, they still had to make it all the way to the farm from the nearest police station, which was in a town about a half an hour away from the town closest to the farm. As I mentioned, very remote. We waited, talking frantically about what we'd seen, until the cops arrived almost an hour later. They arrived with 2 4-wheel drives, and we jumped in to lead them back. And this is where it gets worse. By the time we got back, the container door was open, and there was a fire inside. We had only 2 small extinguishers in the cars, and these did very little against the blaze. The fire department took almost an hour to get there, by which stage most of the damage was already done. An arson report by the federal police found almost no evidence of the computer equipment described, and only traces of paper and cardboard. This means that whoever ran it knew we were there and had time to come and remove most of it to get away. There were various ways to get off the property, and the landmass was huge, so there was no real way to tail them. Since the police hadn't taken us all too seriously in the first place, probably due to our poor explanation on the phone, aerial surveillance was also impossible by the time we had pieced it all together. I took a keen interest in following it up, but with no real evidence of who might have been responsible, the investigation went nowhere. Over the years, I've kept in contact with Jeremy, and that shipping container is still sitting there on the farm, as it's too expensive for him to move. There's never been any further explanation about what was going on in that container, but as long as I live, I'll never forget what I saw in those boxes. As far as I'm concerned, that container was one of the most horrifying places on Earth.